Moshe kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu mesonecha miponecha ki mizion teitzei Torah Kitrach v'yashut Olam toiv Avdo the Kudish Oberi in Kamfoidon Viton Lenosh Rachitsno or Loin Somichno Lishmaya It's that one, yeah. Because it's Tisha, so I think it's important. That's why we don't start with this until the afternoon. It's all the right place. Sorry. Switch me straight, I think. Chadonai Gedula, V'Agefura, V'Atiferet, V'Aneitza, You made something sleep. Gotten played a loving music. Please return your sword and the sheets to the table. So after the Lord's Supper. Create a Torah. Touch it by a comment. Specials. So create a Torah there is part of the observance of Tisha. לא יאכלון ולא יריחון, ביקשתם משען את אדוני אלוהיך ומנעת כי תדרשנו בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך. ושבתה על אדוני אלוהיך ושמרת בקולו כי
לא יקרך, לא ישליטך, לא ישכח את ברית אבותיך, אשר נשבע להם, כי שלח בימים ראשונים אשר היו לפניך, ומן היום אשר ברא אלוהים אדם על הארץ, ולבקצה השמיים ובקצה השמיים הנתיה. כדבר הגדול הזה, או הנשמע כמוהו, היה לו גוי, מקרב גוי במסעות, במלכות ובמופתים ובמלחמה, ובחזקה ובנטייה נוראים גדולים ככל, אשר עשה לכם אדוני אלוהיכם, ומצרים לעיניך, אתה תורא לדעת, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, אין עוד מלבדו. Tisha הגדולה, ודבריו שמעת מתוך האש ותחת, יהלד אבותיך, ויקרא בזרעו אחריו, ויוציאך בפניו, ובכל ידו במצרים להוריש גויים, גדולים עצומים מפניך, להביאך, אתן לך את ארצם, נחלת היום הזה, ידעת היום השיבותה אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת עינות, ושמרת דבוקה במצוותיו, אשר אנוכי מצווך היום אשר יתהפך ולבניך אחריך, ולמען תאריך ימים על האדמים. אנחנו יושבים נאספו על הרי המצר בשם אדוני אלוהינו הדימנו וישכנו מראש ילמדנו אדוני Leil Shalom, Yeto, Esmarte, Yasa. Vidon Nishma, Nakarasu Sabiko, Itzavos Adira, Rasha, Haaretz, Vayavo, Vayavu, Eretz Moab, Ir, Vayva. Inani, Mishalaya, Pater, Nefashim, Sifonim, Shrein Lamed, Vachash, Shtu Espen, Adonai, Yusi, Vayavo, Novai, Yavo, Yiko, Has Ami, Nei Eretz Markatim, Adonai, Inditzion, Imava, Iva, Madu, Yusi, Yusi Lehem, Barkasi, Wakayit, Vanahnu, Moshe, Shabasani, Asharti, Adarti, Shama, Ezikas, Hatzari, and Yoah, Rope, Shanti, Madu Alosa, Alukas, Yenki, Ordima, Tefke, Yom, Hey, Sasami, Enibamba, Morning, the es Ami, the Alpha, Ikuam, Nothing, Atzeres, Oki, Bayadu, Shonam, Kashon, Sheker, Lorena, Forest, Oh, Amar, not for Roots are far, nothing, they said, Asami, Tisha, Tisha, Body Bear, Livy, Shalom, Israel, with the hair, with fear, love, Simar, love. Elon, Papa, Adonai, Goodbye, Hashem, Prazer, Moses, Nake, Hashu, Neko, Hashem, Yadamima, Nabidu, Hama, Unosati, Esu, Ali, Bilawe, Nami, Inore, Benchmama, Yoshe. Mia Isha Papa, Mia Ben, Sorry, Rasher, Gide, Yellow, Ema, Ama, Oka, Sakari, Bar, and Operadana, our farm is so Sherna Sati, and Yoshimuriko Deo, Vayafu, Akare, Shikoshiva, Dakare, Habildi, Asherlindu, Abosa, Vahe, Omar, Adonai Shlo, Saleh Israel, in the Niri, Matin, Ramazel, Adar, Ishkisim, Elo, Sotzim, Babayim, Asher, Loyadu, Ema, Balosam, Shilati, Amorehem, Saperia, Alosi, Osa, Ko Mark Nitros is going to Williamton. Man only knows who's going up. Most true, it's all it's my hair. You see, send away the daddy. You say, right now, I ain't your demand. I thank you too much. You call me the smart PCO. Sure does. Post you, oh, it feels like an artist. You sleep, you know, say. Shemana Hashem Baradai Kakas Neken Arti Ruamena Hinosekan Negi Shamisa Kila Mardas the Halo Negi no say Wapi so long the first Wapi Oh, you don't know, you know, what you know, man. So there, because they are closer, oh, I will sell myself. I will sell happy body to myself. I will sell a sheep, just go. So, Misael, Askel, see, he Adonai, Hosef, said, Scottish Haaretz, Eva Hamas, you don't
Do al eretz v'shamayim yom kippur. Eivos vakim is nach varot na mele v'har Adonai. Miyat v'shamayim kapan v'har. Mazil v'shamayim Please be seated. There's a sheet outside, a double-sided sheet that has the title on it, Kinot Tisha B'Av Tafshin Ayin Tet, the guide to the Kinot of the day of Tisha B'Av. It's a two-sided sheet. I'm going to try to announce the pages each time. I'm also going to announce the number of the Kinot for those who are using the terrific Koren Rav Soloveitchik Kinot, or if you're using the Rosenfeld, or if you're using the little pamphlet. The pagination here in the English is meant to be of the Kinot Utzilot Tisha B'Av of Art Scroll. I discovered only this morning, after many years of doing this, there are two versions of the Art Scroll, and there is different pagination. So I'll try to announce the page in the edition that I use, which is from 1998, but I'm aware that the shul has a number of them that look identical. The pagination is off by a page or two. So again, I'll announce each time which Kina it is. I've listed it only in the Hebrew, the number of the Kina, Vav, Zayin, Het, etc. There's also another sheet that is the Kina al Shoah for much later this morning, probably early afternoon. And you're welcome to avail yourself of that as well, of course, when we get there. For anyone who is not able to stay, I say each year, it's a long morning. So it's a long morning, tarte mashma, morning, double entendre. But for those who are not able to stay the whole time, if you're not feeling well, whatever it is, don't be bashful. If you have to leave, it's fine. No one's going to be offended, insulted. But if you could just be mindful that so the Gabbayim don't have to clean up after us, everyone should just take the sefer, the kinot, and the sheets, and just put them back on the table outside. It'll just be helpful for afterward. Chatzot is 12:56. I'm not bound to finish at 12:55 per se. Depends on the year. Right? It's too loud. Not trying to finish exactly at 12:55 per se, but I will say what I say each year, which is that there is too much to say and there's not enough time, really. I'm indebted to, of course, Rabbi Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzaddik Kodesh Livracha, who was really the one who made the Kinot into something more accessible for people, because he was very much engaged in trying to teach that. And following suit with him, Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter, thank my Chavrusa, Rabbi Daniel Yalkut, who worked together on a lot of this material to prepare for today. And I try to introduce a little bit, just to contemporize some of what we're going to learn together today, which is part and parcel. It's not just saying the words of the Kinot, which has its own value, but also learning about the Kinot so that we understand why we're here, what its meaning is, and what its contemporary significance might be. So here, just by way of introduction, before we start. And of course, we're not really starting because we're already up to Kinot number 6. We said 5 of them last night, plus the one for the Shoah. That's why it's called Kinot 6. And there were those, and there still are those, in various other communities, not Ashkenazi communities, that even in the morning they start with Eicha again, 5 chapters Eicha, and then Kinot number 6 is Shabbat Surah. So it's the organization. Ashkenazim don't do it that way. We just say Eicha at night. But everything that we're going to read is a continuation of the original Sefer Kinot, Book of Lamentations, as was written by Yirmiyahu Hanavi. That's why this morning's Haftorah was of Yirmiyahu Hanavi. So I just want to share with you some contemporary stories, just to think a little bit about what we're up to as a people. I mentioned some of it last night, but here's just something new. On May 22nd of this year, there was a story carried throughout the media in Eretz Yisrael. Volume good now, by the way? So there's a story carried in Eretz Yisrael, and the story was about remains of Second Temple era Jews. The remains of people who were killed during Bayit Sheni and whose West Bank tombs were damaged. Hundreds of Second Temple era Jews who were buried in the area of Yericho were reinterred on Tuesday, May 21, 2019, near Kfar Adumim, after their bones were found scattered outside tombs damaged by Palestinian agricultural work in the area. They were found near the Hasmonean Palace in Jericho, one of the world's oldest cities, after their tombs were said to have been looted. According to the group Regavim, a very important group for those who know what it is, Regavim said these tombs were looted by Arab grave robbers. There was a funeral. Archaeologists from the Defense Ministry, Civil Administration, the Mata Binyamin Regional Council had representatives. The local farmers reportedly told the activists that the sarcophagi from which the bones were removed had recently disappeared, and they had just found the bones. But all the local leaders and the activists pointed out that this was a Palestinian trampling of archaeological sites linked to millennia of Jewish history in the West Bank. Regavim director Meir Deutsch called this burial an act of true grace, not only toward the remains of our ancestors, but to our heritage and our history, which are being brutally trampled by the Palestinian Authority in Yericho and thousands of other archaeological sites throughout Yehuda and Shomron, the land of the Bible and the cradle of Jewish culture. The Mata Binyamin council head, Yisrael Gantz, also spoke about this reinterment. He lashing the believing destroyers of the tombs as greedy, callous thieves who have no respect for human dignity and laid their hands on the remains of our ancestors. March 6th of this year, 2019, the Polish government considered a proposal to exhume the remains of Jewish people who were buried in a mass grave in Jedwabne. 340 Jews were locked in a barn by Poles July 10, 1941, and the barn was set on fire. And so they decided, ultimately, after the protest of Chief Rabbi Michael Shudrich, who said it would make sense that we should follow the religious tradition of those who were buried there. Jewish law hasn't changed in 2,000 years, and what we said in 2001 when this came up remains the same now. The Jedwabne pogrom was one of several massacres carried out by Poles during the German occupation. Many historians see it as evidence that anti-Semitism exists in a significant part of the Polish population. That was on March 6th. In the end, it was stopped. They didn't exhume the bodies, but it was a proposal in Poland. In May of this year, actually reported it on the exact same day as the story about the bones in the area of Jericho, they discovered for the first time the remains of 1,214 Holocaust victims in a little town known as Brest-Litovsk. Mass graves. They were trying to build they're still trying to build, they plan on building some kind of a shopping mall. They decided to uproot, they discovered it as they're digging, a mass grave that had never been found before. The Shoah ended in 1945. We're still discovering mass graves right now. And it describes how Zaka was called to the scene from Eretz Yisrael, and they reburied the 1,214 bodies, the skeletons. That's what they found. They don't know, they have crushed pieces as well. They gathered them together in 120 coffins that were draped with talesim, and then had those buried in another site because the government of Belarus was insistent that they were going to be using that site. They're not planning now to build a building on top of it. They're going to make a park there. It's better than a building to make a park. And this just happened. This is happening right now. For those who don't know, of course, our community, the communities of Israel, drink from the waters of the Torah that came from Brisk in almost every single yeshiva in the literature world, in Yeshiva Shevelt, from Reb Chaim of Brisk and the Beis Halevi before him, of Moshe Soloveitchik, of our communities, or Sein Gesund und Stark, his family, that's where the family's from, descendants such as he is, of Reb Aaron Soloveitchik, who himself was born there and grew up there in Brest-Litovsk, was the son of Moshe Soloveitchik, was the son of Reb Chaim Brisker, the son of the Beis Halevi. This goes all the way back in the lineage to the Gra, to the Gaon of Vilna himself. And indeed, the World Jewish Congress decried this whole construction project as an affront to the memories of Jewish residents of the city who were shot and murdered in cold blood at that very site. And that's when the city authorities insisted that the block's foundation would not overlap with the burial site. They put up a little monument. They will not build anything there. We'll just put a lawn on the site. The BBC reported on this story. It said that the reporter that they sent was shocked. She was there when they were digging, and she saw there what looked like the skeleton of a grown-up cradling the skeleton of an infant right there in the ground, found exactly in that position. Now, these are stories that are happening right now. These stories happened within the last number of months. They're not from ages ago. They're not from centuries ago. They're stories about people whose descendants are still alive now, and they're walking around in Eretz Yisrael, in Chutz La'aretz, wherever it is. And that means we have to redouble our efforts. They don't even let the bones, in many cases, just rest in peace. They're unearthed, and even now, the curse that we have against our enemies, we refer to in the Gemara and the Mishnah, and the Medrash rather, Sheik Atzamos, may their bones be ground up, is unfortunately something that's happened to our people so often. And it's incredible to think about it, that this is the time that we live in. Even now, Adiyom Hazeh, it's still going. I want to speak to you about some other aspects, though, as we go into this, to appreciate what we're doing here. I want to talk to you about coinage. Coins are very important because coins very often were minted to represent historic figures and historic moments. Just last summer, they unearthed a new coin. It's an old coin, but they just found it. That was minted in approximately the year 69 of of the common era. So it is that they found this little coin. And symbolically, when did they find it? At Shiva Sarbatamuz, last year, was the exact day the archaeologists found this little coin. And it's a coin that says on it, in ancient Hebrew script, it says the words, for the redemption of Tzion. The previous coins that they had found even from the years 66 and 67, which is just at the time of the start of the rebellion, it said for the freedom of Tzion. And they changed it in 6970 for the redemption of Tzion. So various archaeologists think that it's because basically the people minting these coins, they knew already that it was like a suicide mission, they're not going to win. Rome was an extremely powerful empire, obviously. The ditch was originally uncovered there. We were there just now, those of us in the Ortora Heritage Mission, we stood there in this exact place. It was uncovered in 2007. It's the largest underground system. It's part of the City of David National Park. It runs from the Robinson's Arch Archaeological Garden under the Ophel excavations to an area just north of the Siloam Pool. According to the writings of Yosef ben Matityahu, we call him Josephus, some 2,000 rebels were killed by Romans while hiding in those drainage ditches. Archaeological finds back up Josephus' claim. While cooking, pots, coins, and even a Roman sword of the era have been uncovered in the system of their underground drainage ditches. Shukron suspects that the rebels, he's the archaeologist, hid in this drainage ditch in the last days prior to the fall of the city to the Romans. It's possible, he says, that this coin, which was placed in the pocket of a Jerusalemite, hiding from the Romans in underground warrens, or maybe it rolled into the drainage ditch while the coin's owner walked the streets of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. That was just found a year ago. You see that coin. The minting of coins always represents some kind of a moment. So we actually have the coin, which is the first coin issued at the mint of what's called Aelia Capitolina in the year approximately, it says here 132, but it's probably a little bit later actually. And it was a picture, it's a picture in the coin of Hadrian. And Hadrian is standing, leading oxen who are dragging a plow. For those who are watching the broadcast, you can see it up close. This is a picture of the actual coin. Now, what is this coin? 5 terrible things happened on Tisha B'Av, and we commemorate these 5 things. The Mishnah in Masechet Tani tells us what they are. 5 things. The decree that the Jewish people were forbidden from going into the land of Israel, a whole generation would die. Number 2, the Beit HaMikdash, first and second, was destroyed, both times the same day. Milkada Beitar, Beitar was destroyed. That was in the revolt, 132 to 135, the Bar Kokhba revolt. And the final one is the Nechush Ha'ir. The city was plowed under. And this is a picture of Hadrian triumphant plowing the city. The Gemara Masechet Bava Kama, Daf Tzadi Zayin and Bet, wants to know whether you can use various coinage for the purpose of being Poda Maser Sheni, for those who know what it is. But let's just say the coinage that they're discussing back and forth is a discussion of different coinage. Sorry, before the Gemara and Bava Kama come back to in a minute, it's Gemara and Avodah Zarah. After the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, Amar of Oshaya, this is the Gemara Avodah Zarah, Nun Bet Amud Bet. Amar of Oshaya, Bikshu Lignos Kol Kesef V'Zav Sheba'olam, Mishum Kaspa V'Dahava Shli Yerushalayim. When the temple was destroyed, they wanted to actually put away all of the money, the gold and the silver that existed in the whole world. That's what the Chachamim wanted to do. Why? Because of the gold and the silver of Yerushalayim. So the Gemara asks, Va'avinan ba Yerushalayim Havya Ruba de Alma? Is Yerushalayim the majority of the whole world? There's a concept in Judaism of Bittul Berov. If most of the gold and silver of the world is not from Yerushalayim, so why do you think that the coin that you have is the gold and silver from Yerushalayim? Why couldn't you use the gold and silver from Yerushalayim? Very simply, because the gold and silver from Yerushalayim, all of it, belonged to the temple treasury. A few years ago, I read from you Professor Feldman from Oxford, who's a visiting professor at Yeshiva University, and he had the numbers of the money of how much it was that was plundered from the temple. That money was used in large measure to build the Colosseum in Rome, according to what we know. Louis Feldman, that's what he writes about in an archaeological magazine. So the Gemara answers, El Amar Abaye, Bikshu Lignos Dinara Hadrayana Turaina Shifa. Mipnei Tiva Tava Shel Yerushalayim. So Abaye says no, what they wanted to get rid of in the gold and the silver was specifically the coins that were minted by Hadrian and by Trajan. Trajan actually came before Hadrian. He was the emperor before Hadrian. The point is, they made coins. And Davka, their coins, were Davka coins that were made with the money plundered from Yerushalayim. And the Gemara here points out that Ad Shamatzu Mikra Min Torah, then they found a pasuk from the Torah, from Sefer Yechezkel, Shumutter, really they could use these coins. And what pasuk is that? Uba Pritzim B'Chidaluha, in the 7th parak of Yechezkel, and the wanton ones came and they breached it, and therefore they defiled it. Rashi here writes, Kaspa v'Dahava Shel Yerushalayim Sheruba Hekdesh. Most of it belonged to the temple treasury, and it has status that was sacred, and therefore couldn't be used. It was sacralized. It was Hekdesh. Turaina Hadraina Shifa Matbeot Yerushalayim. Turaina Hadraina, writes Rashi, Hashem Malchei Romi Nasu Hatsuot Ushmam Turianus Adarianus. Bali Tosfot, Rabbi Yenu Tam asks the question, wait a minute, I thought the matbeh of Yerushalayim, the coin of Yerushalayim, is just the coin of Yerushalayim on one side, and on the other side is the pictures, as it were, of David and Shlomo. And he says, the Aruch says it this way, so the Bali Tosfot answer that for sure, Adarianus and Torianus, when they were ruling over Israel, they destroyed the original pictures that were on the original coinage, and they made their own names on there instead. They replaced one with the other. And after the Churban, a lot of people therefore wanted to put these coins away completely. Now the Gemara in Baba Kama, which mentions that if a person had ma'ot, kozviot, Yerushalmiot, then you can't use it for the pidyon of Maser Sheni. Basically, if you had a secondary tithe, you wanted to bring it up to Yerushalayim, but you don't want to bring the fruits themselves, you could take a coin and move the hekde, the kedusha, to the coin. And then the coin would go to Yerushalayim, you buy fruit in Yerushalayim. But if you had a ma'ot kozviot, you couldn't use it. What's ma'ot kozviot? Something kozev is something denigrated. What would it be? Counterfeit. It's bunk. That's not worth anything. But Rashi says, you know what it was called kozviot? Matbea shel ben Kuziba. It was the coinage that belonged to a man named Ben Kuziba. Who is Ben Kuziba? We know him by the name that Rabbi Akiva gave him. And that is the name Bar Kochva. He made coins. They were minting coins because they had a 3-year rebellion. They said, we will triumph. And therefore, that was the story of the destruction of Beitar. And indeed, Yerushalmi and Maser Sheni writes this. Matbea shemarad kegon ben Kuziba eno mechalel. In the end, the coin was canceled because the rebellion did not work. I won't read it now, but you're familiar probably with the Rambam in Parak Yud Aleph of Sefer Malachim, Halacha Gimel, which describes that Rabbi Akiva was in a certain way the standard bearer, the arms bearer of none other than this person, Bar Kochva, Bar Koziba. He called him Bar Kochva because of the pasuk in Parshat Balak, Darach Kochav Yaakov, a shooting star comes from Yaakov, and he thought that this man was the Mashiach. He was wrong, unfortunately. Sadly, he was wrong. Before our group went to Poland, I tried to talk a little bit with everyone about the ongoing discussion about the uniqueness of the Shoah. The Shoah is on one level a continuity with everything that's happened before, but on another level, it stands alone. It's unique. And there's a professor at the University of Toronto named Michael Maris who did a lot of work in this regard, who argues for the uniqueness of the Shoah. The problem is, even from a theological perspective, the more we're going to talk about the Shoah as something that's sui generis, it's unique, there's no parallel to it, the less we can even put it into historical categories or see it as any kind of a continuity. There's a tension over here. And we need to understand this today. I mentioned last night in over Shabbos, I'm talking more about the Shoah this year than in other years. I'm mindful of the fact that this day, Yom Marvinim Har, this bitter and embittering day, is not exclusively about the Shoah. It's about all the terrible things that have happened to Klal Yisrael. The Shoah is just among the most recent of them. At the same time, it is so often ever present with us, and we need to recognize that, even on days like today especially. But now that we did this mission, the 24 members of the community went, maybe we'll do another mission someday, who knows, to think about this idea a little bit, about the uniqueness of the Shoah and what differentiated it in a certain way from other calamities that befell Klal Yisrael, and that in a certain way even, I would say, differentiates the Shoah, the Holocaust, from other terrible tragedies that have befallen other people. Three things. One, the scope. At Wannsee, in January of 1942, the top brass of the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, outlined how many Jews live in each and every place in the world, in Europe, right down to Albania, 200 Jews. The intention was not to get rid of Jews in this or that area, but to get rid of the Jewish people, Rahman al-Islam, everywhere in Europe. But it wasn't just Europe, we understand now. A few years ago, I showed you on Tisha B'Av the story about the booklet that was unearthed, where Hitler Yamach Shemo v'Zichro had commissioned a census of the number of Jews living in each of the communities in the United States and Canada. We know for sure that had Rommel Yamach Shemo not been stopped in North Africa, his intention was to come northward through Egypt up to Palestine and to do the exact same thing there. That's a scope that is without parallel. It's not just to kill the people here or there, but to kill every single person who is associated with Klal Yisrael anywhere on the globe. And we know that now. Number two, the industrialization. Here are scientists and judges. Here are people who are engineers and builders, craftsmen, even artists, even videographers that they had, little movies, and photographers, and cooks, and all sorts of people from every walk of life were commissioned and brought to bear for this project. And from who? From the height of Western culture and society. Philosophy, sciences, the arts, it was all Germany. And everything was brought to bear for this project. Raoul Hilberg, the historian, wrote about the Holocaust extensively. In the book that is the transcript of Claude Lanzmann's masterful and extremely lengthy work, film, The Shoah, describes this idea. And he says, he was asked by Claude Lanzmann, what did they get from the past, the Nazis, in order to do what they did? Answers Hilberg, they got the actual content of measures which they took. For example, the barring of Jews from office, the prohibition of intermarriages and of the employment in Jewish homes of female persons under the age of 45, the various marking decrees, especially the Jewish star, the compulsory ghetto, the avoidance of any will executed by a Jew that might work in some ways to prevent inheritance of his property by someone who was a Christian. Many such measures had been worked out over the course of more than 1,000 years by authorities of the church and by secular governments that followed in those footsteps. And the experience gathered over that time became a reservoir that could be used, and which indeed was used to an amazing extent. One can compare a rather large number of German laws with their counterparts in the past and find complete parallels, even in detail, as if there were a memory which automatically extended to the period of 1933, 1935, 1939, and beyond. They invented very little, and they did not invent the portrait of the Jew, which was also taken over lock, stock, and barrel from writings going back to the 16th century. So even the propaganda, the realm of imagination and invention, even there, they were remarkably in the footsteps of those who preceded them, from Martin Luther to the 19th century. And here again, they were not inventive. They had to become inventive with the final solution, what they call the final solution. That was their great invention. And that is what made this entire process different from all others that had preceded that event. In this respect, what transpired when the final solution was adopted, or to be more precise, bureaucracy moved into it, was a turning point in history. Even here, I would suggest a logical progression when it came to fruition in what might be called a closure. Because from the earliest days, from the 4th century, the 6th century, the missionaries of Christianity had said in effect to the Jews, you may not live among us as Jews. The secular rulers who followed them from the Middle Ages declared, you may not live among us. And the Nazis finally decreed, you may not live. Conversion was followed by expulsion. And the third was the territorial solution, which was, of course, the solution carried out in the territories under German command, excluding emigration, death, the final solution. And the final solution, you see, is really final because people who are converted can yet be Jews in secret. People who are expelled can yet return, but people who are dead will not reappear. In such a respect, asks Lanzmann, the last stage, they were really pioneers and inventors, weren't they? This was something unprecedented, says Hilberg, and this was something new. How can one give some idea about this complete newness? Because it was new for them too. Yes, it was new. And he goes on to describe the following. And I think for this reason, he says, one cannot find a specific document, a specific planned outline or blueprint which stated, now the Jews will be killed. Everything is left to inference from general words. General words, the very wording, final solution or total solution or territorial solution, leaves something to the bureaucrat that he must infer. He cannot read that document. One cannot even read Göring's famous letter to Heydrich at the end of July 41, charging him in 2 paragraphs to proceed with the final solution, and examining the document, consider that everything is clarified. Far from it. And here's the key sentence. It was an authorization to invent. It was an authorization to begin something new that was not as yet capable of being put into words. I think of it that way. Landsman says, finally, it was a case for every agency as a matter of fact. Answers Hilberg, absolutely for every agency. In every aspect of this operation, invention was necessary. Certainly at this point, because every problem was unprecedented. Not just how to kill the Jews, but what to do with their property thereafter. And not only that, but how to deal with the problem of not letting the world know what had happened. All this multitude of problems was new. Point number 2, in the service of murder, of genocide, the Shoah. Number 3, when the Hitlerites, Yamah Shema v'Zichra, knew that they were losing the war, you would think that they would want to throw everything to the war effort, because if they don't survive as an empire, then they can never carry out their aims. And yet, we know. Martin Gilbert describes in the book aptly named The Holocaust, an unbelievable compendium. He describes that even on the Eastern Front, when the German armies were already losing, they had already lost Stalingrad. They were driven back over hundreds of miles. There was no military setback that could stop the deportation of Jews. January 20, 1943, Heinrich Himmler in sent the Reichsminister of Transport a special letter about the removal of Jews from the general government, the Eastern territories and the West. For this he wrote, I need your help and support. If I am to wind things up quickly, I must have more trains for transports. I know very well how taxing the situation is for the railways and what demands are constantly made of you. Just the same, I must make this request of you. Help me get more trains. Mori Virabi, the Yehuda Amital, Zechatzad V'Kadosh Livracha, told his Talmidim, I was there one time when he told us, they saw the trains being diverted. It should have been going to the Russian front, that were being sent in order to deport the Jews of Hungary to the camps, to Auschwitz. We have a copy of the speech. It was published in the foreword of the book Treblinka by Jean-François Steiner, 1967. The speech by Himmler on October 4th, 1943 to the SS generals in Posen, who actually said in the speech, which was transcribed, and we have now, I also want to speak very frankly about an extremely important subject. Among ourselves, we will discuss it openly. In public, however, we must never mention it. I mean the evacuation of the Jews, the extermination of the Jewish people. This is something that is easy to talk about. The Jewish people will be exterminated, says every member of the party. This is clear. This is our program. The elimination, the extermination of the Jews, we will do this. And then they come to you, 80 million good bodies. Not one has been on the spot. Most of you know that what it is to see a pile of 100 or 500 or 1,000 bodies, to have stuck it out and at the same time, barring exceptions caused by human weakness, to have remained decent. This is what has made us tough. He concluded the speech with the line, this is a glorious page in our history which never has and never will be written. And now I want to tell you something. This was not driven home to us who went on this trip any more vividly than arriving at the camp that is described in great detail, and you can see in Schindler's List. This year makes 25 years since the release of that movie in 1994. We watched it actually part of it on the bus. And when you get finally to Plaszow, members of my community growing up, Meyer Schandorf, Zichrono Livracha, Shtibadl, Chaim Tov Maruchin, Rina Schandorf, still comes to shul. You get to Plaszow, there's nothing there. It's mamish hills, and grass, and trees. And if you didn't know, you would have no idea what happened there. Nothing. The last day of our trip, we went to Treblinka. What Jew hasn't heard of Treblinka? Today we believe there's approximately 900,000 Jews who were murdered in Treblinka. And when you walk through the forest to Treblinka, and there are no train tracks anymore to Treblinka, they were uprooted by the Polish government. They needed the rail metal, and they uprooted the train tracks. They're concrete slabs. When you finally get to Treblinka, I'll describe it a little later. You're wondering, where is Treblinka? 1 million people, almost, were murdered in this place, and there's nothing, not one building. Yitzchak Arad in 1987 wrote a book called Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, the Operation Reinhard death camps. And I need you to understand this. I know this is a top-heavy introduction. I'm mindful of the time. We've done before Chatzot. We haven't said a single one of the Kinot yet, but this needs to frame the whole discussion and the whole nature of the day. Yitzchak Arad writes a whole chapter about the erasure of the crimes. In March of 1942, Heydrich met in Warsaw with Paul Blobel, who was the SS commander of the Einsatzkommando 4A, who had carried out killings in Kiev and other places in the Ukraine. Killings in Kiev refers to Babi Yar. In Babi Yar, I was there in 2011 the last time. There are 33,741 people who are there in the ravines of Babi Yar, also just a wooded area today. The two of them had a meeting, and he told him, Heydrich discussed with Blobel the matter of his appointment to lead the operation of erasing all traces of the mass murders and the ways that it would be implemented. This task was top secret, and Blobel was ordered that no written correspondence should appear on the subject. They called it by the code name Sonderaktion 1005. Sobibor was first. The reasons for the operation were local. As a result of the hot weather in the summer of 1942, the buried corpses swelled and the fully packed mass graves rose up above the surrounding surface. The entire area became infested with vermin, and a terrible stench pervaded the camp and its surrounding areas. The camp commanders feared that the drinking water, which came from the dug wells, would be contaminated and poisoned. Therefore, the decision was made to start burning the bodies in Sobibor. A big excavator was brought to the camp. A special group of Jewish prisoners was also assigned to this work. The decomposed corpses were taken out of the pits by the excavator and arranged on a big roaster built from the old railway tracks laid over an empty pit. Later, the extermination area of Sobibor were engaged in cremating the corpses. Therefore, no evidence, written or oral, was left by them about this operation. There are, however, some testimonies of Jewish prisoners who were in the other part of the camp. Leon Feldhendler wrote about the start of the cremation of the corpses in the camp. In the first period, there was no crematorium. After gassing, the people were laid into the graves. Then out of the soil, blood and a bad odor of gas began to surface. Terrible smells poured over the whole camp, penetrating everything. The water in Sobibor became rancid. This forced the Germans to build a crematorium. It was a large pit with a roaster above it. The bodies were thrown on the roaster. The fire was ignited from beneath, and petrol was poured on the corpses. The bones were crushed into ashes with hammers. In Belzec, Jacob Yaakov Wiernik, who was in the extermination area, describes it was genuine hell. From a distance, it looked like a volcanic eruption boiling up through the Earth's surface and spreading flames and lava. Everything around was caught up in the noise and the turmoil. At night, the smoke, fire, and heat was unbearable. In Treblinka, the body burning went on day and night. Corpses were transferred and arranged in the roast during the day. At nightfall, they were lit, and they burned throughout the night. When the fire went out, there were only skeletons with scattered bones in the roasters and piles of ash underneath. Another special prisoner team, known as the Ash Group, had the task of collecting the ash and removing the remains of the charred bones from the grill and placing them on tin sheets. Round wooden sticks were then used to break the bones into small fragments. These were then run through a tightly woven screen made of metal wire. Those bone fragments, which did not pass through the screen, were returned for further smashing. A few prisoners who worked inside the pits from which the corpses were removed and were engaged in cleaning the pits of solid human remains and scattering the ashes decided to leave some evidence of the Germans' mass murder. Avram Goldfarb relates, "We secretly placed in the walls of the graves whole skeletons. And we wrote on scraps of paper into bottles which we placed next to the skeletons. Our intention was that if one day someone looked for traces of the Nazis' crimes, they could indeed be found." The spring winds, said another prisoner, brought with them the smell of burning bodies from the nearby extermination camp. We breathed in the stench of the smoldering corpses, and we heard the clatter of excavators for days and nights on end. At night, we gazed at skies red from the flames. Sometimes you could see tongues of flame rising into the night. The task lasted about 4 months, till about July 43. To accomplish the task, the cremating took place simultaneously in a number of sites, and the largest number of Jewish prisoner workers were put to work in the various required stages. By using excavators to unearth the corpses of the victims, employing Jewish prisoners in large numbers, and operating simply built, huge open-space crematoria, concludes Yitzhak Arad, which were activated in the shortest possible time, the Operation Reinhardt staff was able to complete its mission of cremation and the erasure of the despicable crimes. This year, on March the 6th, the last Soviet survivor of Sobibor died. The last person who actually was there, Semyon Rosenfeld, 96 years of age, passed away. He died in a hospital in central Israel, survived by 2 sons and 5 grandchildren. He lived in a retirement home in Yad Binyamin, and he passed away there at the Kaplan Medical Center in Rehovot. He was born in the Ukraine in 1922, and in 1940 he was captured as a member of the Red Army. He was brought with 230 prisoners, eventually transferred to Sobibor. And he escaped in September 1943 during the uprising at Sobibor. He was among those people who ran away. He was the last living person who had ever seen the camp with his own eyes. If you go online, you could do this afternoon, or if you leave here later today, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem both have video testimony of other people who were part of that revolt. I only discovered in doing the research for today, of all things, one of the people who was involved in that rebellion in Sobibor, his name was Chaim Engel. I'm still trying to track down if there's any relation, probably not, but that he was also one of the people involved in that revolt. Died. There's one person left who survived from Treblinka. His name is Leon Poldek Ritz. You can't really watch his testimony because it's in Swedish. He escaped from Treblinka, and he is the last living person who is still alive today and whose testimony you can find online. The last survivor of Treblinka who actually saw and was part of the rebellion, the uprising, was Samuel Willenberg. He died just a few years ago. He was part of the rebellion and he died a few years ago. It is only because of the sketches of Samuel Willenberg that we even know that layout of what Treblinka looked like. So when we went to Treblinka, I'm walking around and there is an open area, a vast open area with a massive monument, a series of monuments, and there's a forest. In 2012, a British researcher, a young woman who is not Jewish, decided she's going to make it her life's work to go to Treblinka and to try to actually find these burial sites. She's not yet confirmed finding any of the burial sites. They planted a forest over much of what was the camp. This is all we have, friends, that reminds us of these places. But in our show, we have one other thing. Today I'm going to invoke the memory. I mentioned him at Treblinka. I mentioned him. And, Gary Beitner said a cottage. I have permission, so I'm saying it. Today, Stan Weisbrot, so Sein Gesund, led the davening as an Avelis for his mother. Our community was Zocha for how many years? To be led on Simchas Torah right after we take out the beautiful canopy, the chuppah, with all the children's names. For the Kol HaNe'arim, we see all the children, Baruch Hashem, hundreds of children in our shul. Right after the celebrated dancing Simchas Torah. Who laid the Haftorah for us, the beginning of Sefer Yeshua? Ben Yehoshua. Avram Yosef ben Yehoshua, Weisbrot. He jumped the train to Treblinka. Very few people jumped the train to Treblinka and survived. He jumped the train. He is the person who was the Ben Yehoshua who stood there to read Sefer Yeshua, the beginning of Sefer Yeshua. So I told this story at Treblinka, and I reminded everybody on our trip, I want you to remember something. At the end of Parshat B'Shalach,
That is where Moshe Rabbeinu says to Yeshua bin Nun, get up, Yeshua. You're now the commander-in-chief to wage the war against Amalek. The parsha ends, Ki yad al keis ka, u'chaba ba'amalek midor dor. There's a hand on the throne of Hashem, a hand, a shadow cast, as it were, on the heavenly throne. And that hand is cast there by none other than Amalek. Ki yad al keis ka. There'll be a war against Amalek, one generation to the next. Who stood against Amalek? Yoshua bin Nun. Who stands against Amalek? The Ben Yoshua. We were zocha with our own eyes to see in Ashur. The zocha to know Mishpachat Weisbar, Mishpachat Schreiber, the members of our Torah. And understand that this idea of bearing witness and being the people who will read the Kinot now, we're the people who carry the standard bearers of memory, and to appreciate and to understand the depths to which in the Shoah and its attempt to erase the Shoah, we're the ones who draw the sketches. I have the pictures of the actual sketches that Willenberg drew. It's all we have left. We have nothing left. There's nothing. We were just there. We walked through the forest. There's not one thing left. You can't see anything when you go. And if someone would tell you nothing happened here, you would believe them. There's no way to know. But people who jumped the train know. And people like Willenberg know. And people like Rick know. All the people who survived tell us that story. Now we're going to say Shabbat Suru. We're going to start. I'm going to tell you the following. We have an expression that we use all the time about brachas, about kiddush, about havdalah. It's called Matbeah Shetivu Chachamim, the coin that was minted by the Chachamim. There are coins that are minted that can be erased. There are coins that are minted that can be canceled. But there are coins that are minted that can never go away. Because every time we say a bracha, we're minting the coin again that the Chachamim minted for us when we say those words. These are minted coins, the minted coins of the Kinot that were written first by Yirmiyahu, and then written by the Kalir of Elazar HaKalir, and then written throughout the ages by the greatest Chachamim. If they weren't Nevi'im, they were certainly B'nai Nevi'im. And every word that we say, and so often the language is hard to understand, and I urge you, if you get tired or you can't keep up with the Hebrew, so read it in English for yourself. But you're bearing witness, bearing memory, and you're helping that the Matbeah Shetivu Chachamim is going to blot out the Matbeah Shetivu Ha'amalekim, etc., and is instead going to establish this. This is what will survive. We begin now our reading of Kinot this morning. On page 152 in the edition, again, that I have, I'll keep announcing the edition that I have, but it's Kinot number 6, called Shabbat Suru. I'll speak about it in a couple of minutes, but let's read the Kinot together, page 152. Shabbat Suru, medicine. Schilma Oz, Esin, Edwin Chaviyah, Sakot, Mistan, Sakot, Huvudu, Soft Bukhav. Nafodayno, Tzulchuyayni, Chikita, Lapazan Benderecha. Namalil Lichia, Pnei, Ferad, Bitsuf, Hasidera, Kambisuf, Sachak, Yesodera, Hachat Cheshilo, Hachasaya, Patsu Chazir, Yal, Ayur, Hasidera, Patsu Masa, Ariel, Verset Zion, Yadeha, Hatzion, Sadu Shalom, Adonai, Tzafo, Rashrei, Zion, Zidonai, Tzamtu, Benov Lamod, Zidonai, Tzor, Natsarto, Leorer, Adonai, Tzak, Ami, Vimei, Adonai, Tzarihu, Adonai, Atzahali, Chmaito, Nedi, Emuni, Hiraftam, Eloi, Bachimuni, Barat, Yoshvekon, Odheim, Zemuni, Kol, Hashmi, Avarat, Emuni, Kumi avoid Hatel, Karatu Avai, Lamruach Apeno, and Hasumaru, Ito, Ora, Moro, Yamala, Moro, Heskel, Gomoro, Benachdenko, Yamoro, Eadmai, Hitzavina, Achamaru, Sissima, Sipton the most, let's say that hard to get to very Yoz Hazot Halecha, Iro Tzalmon Yotzei Hatzmunecha, Yimahei Yotzei Hanecha, Tikr Sa Shacharit, Koz Kamuz B'Fnecha, Ol Choratam, Oil Tsar Asher Kilonu, Chochamat B'Chinol Halonu, Allah Allah, Allah Allah, B'Chavor Yigonu, Zog Yivachu V'Tulon Yigonu, Beit, Na'amcha Kulonu, Zepar Adonai, Necha Yolonu. In this Kinot that we just read, we mentioned about Patsu. It's on page 154 in mine, the second one, Patsu Chazira Ya'ar. The boars, the wild boars of the forest, were jeering. The Gemara Masechet Bava Kama, Daf Pei Bet, says, Ein megadlin chazirim b'chol makom. You're not allowed to raise pigs in Eretz Yisrael. Tana Rabban, our sages taught. Kitzaro Beit Chashmonai Zel Zeh. You know, sadly, that even though there's a great victory on Hanukkah, which we continue to celebrate as well we should, unfortunately, the house of the Hasmoneans, the Chashmonaim, was set against itself in rebellion, against itself and in civil war. The Gemara describes when one brother went against the other. One was inside, Hyrcanus was inside Yerushalayim, and Aristobulus put a siege outside. Two brothers, one against the other with their armies. Jew against Jew. The people inside would send down with a pulley system a little basket with coins. And they would send up to them the burnt offerings, the korban tamid. Just imagine, they're set against each other. Who's going to control the Beit HaMikdash? And as they're set against each other, both sides realize an amnesty, that we can't not go with the korbanot. At least that we're going to permit that a korban should be brought every day. The offerings in the temple, we can't stop that. It's one Jew against another, ready to kill each other, literally at each other's throats. How can we go against the Seder Avoda? That's sacrosanct to have temple service. So it was that the besieged ones would lower a basket with coins, and the other group would give them the offerings. If you want to know where this was, by the way, we know exactly where this was. You ever go to the Kotel? If you walk all the way down the Kotel to the corner of the western wall and the southern wall, that's where the stalls were, where people would buy korbanot. That's where it happened. It's not, we don't know where this was, some mythical place. We know exactly where it was. That's where the pulley system was. And so it was at that time. There was an elderly person there who knew the wisdom of Greece. Amar Lahem said to them, don't you understand? As long as they're engaged in the service in the Mikdash, they'll never be given to your hands. It'll never happen. Lamachar, Shilshlu Dinar Bakupa. The next day, Hyrcanus' people sent down the coins. Aristobulus' people, the Helu Lahem Chazir. They put a pig in it. They lifted up, they came up to the top. They saw it was a pig. Kevin Shigia Lachatzi Hachoma, and the pig was halfway up. Neitz Tzipornav Bachoma. The animals had to be alive. They were only shechted on the top. So it put its talons into the wall. And Izdaza Eretz Yisrael, Arbamot Parsa. Eretz Yisrael itself shook 400 parsa by 400 parsa. So Tasha Amru, in that exact time, they said, Or ha'ishi yagadu chazirin, or ha'adam she lamidit beno chachmat yivanit. Cursed be the one who will raise pigs, and cursed be the one who will teach his child the wisdom of Greece. The story, according to the Ramban and Sefer of Reshit and Parshat Vayechi, ends in the end with one of the sides getting real smart and saying, you know who can rescue us from these people? Only one group is stronger than my brother. The Romans. We'll invite Rome to come. And you know the rest of the story. And so it turns out the way Rome comes to Eretz Yisrael, the Ramban quotes in the Sefer HaMakkabim there in Parshat Vayechi, is because Jews invited them, essentially. It's hard to understand. There's much more to say about it, but I'll stop here for now. Let me just say one other thing, though, which is very, very important, because it's in this also, the same section, where it mentions, on the top of page 154, the Pachat Chet Shiloh. What is the Pachat Chet Shiloh? Shiloh was a place where the Mishkan, when they brought it to Eretz Yisrael, it eventually settled in Shiloh for 369 years. Think of the last 369 years of world history. It's on mind-boggling. 369 years, there was a Mishkan in Shiloh, stone walls, and a canopied top. And it was destroyed by the Plishtim. Aron Kodesh was taken captive. The Pachad Chet Shiloh always hung over the Jewish people. In the 7th chapter of Yirmiyahu was told by Hashem, go stand, Amod B'shar Beit Hashem, V'karat Hashem Devar Azev Amarta, call out to all of the people, and tell the people, Shimu Dvar Hashem, Kol Yehuda Habayim B'sharna, Eil Yishtachel Hashem. Where's this gate? You're wondering where the gate is? On the southern wall. You ever been to the southern wall excavations? It's right there. We have the outline of the doors from Bayit Sheni. So the Bayit Rishon was a little more set in, but that's the section. Stand there and call out to the people who are going through the gates. Get their attention. Kol Amar Hashem Tzvakot, Elokei Yisrael. Heitivu darcheichem aleichem, v'ashkenai etchem b'makom hazeh. Al tiftu lechem el divrei hasheker limor, heichal Hashem, heichal Hashem, heichal Hashem, hema. So says the Lord of hosts. Make your ways better. And essentially, I will continue to dwell in this area. Do not trust the words of the liars, the lying words that say it's the sanctuary of God, sanctuary of God, sanctuary of God. People think that nothing bad can happen. Why? So obviously, nothing bad can happen because it's the house of Hashem. I'll never allow it to be destroyed. Yirmiyahu tells the people, yes, it can be destroyed. And in making the case to them and telling them that they need to really make amends and do right and not just continue in the way that they're going, he essentially tells them that go now. He tells them, the words actually are spoken. Yirmiyahu, in the name of God, tells the people, you want to see what could happen? Why don't you go up to Shiloh? Go see what happened. And my name was put there originally. My house was there. Because of the wickedness of the Jewish people, look what I did there. And indeed, Va'ata and now, Yana Sotchim Klamasim Elonim Hashem, Vadabar Leichem Hashkim V'daber V'loshmatem, V'akrayetchem V'loanitem. You're not doing what I asked you to do, which is to make amends, to be better, to do tshuva. And you continue to do this, V'asiti labayit asher nikra shmi alav asher atem bodchim bo. I will do to this house which my name is placed upon it, which you have so much trust in. V'lamakom asher natati lachem v'avotechem ka'asher asiti l'Shiloh. I'm going to make this place like Shiloh. Rav Yisrael Rosen, the late Rav Yisrael Rosen, pointed out that in the Chet of Shiloh, what was the big Chet? They had transformed the Aron Kodesh into a totem. They thought as long as we bring it out to a battle, we'll always win. It has nothing to do with our conduct, etc. So they almost idolized, in the most pejorative sense of idolized, the Aron Kodesh. And that was a big mistake, and that's why it gets taken captive, etc. At the time of the Churban Bayit Rishon, that always hung over everyone, is that once it had happened the first time, it could happen any time. It's called overconfidence. It's hubris. It's a sense that a Jew has that, well, if it exists now, today, nothing bad could have happened to it. Because Hashem would never let that happen. It could never be. But we read the Shema today, the second paragraph, and we know otherwise. But we understand this very, very well. Nothing is guaranteed. Everything depends, especially in Eretz Yisrael, on the barometer of Jewish morality, Jewish religious conduct. Everything comes down to that. It's true on the highest levels of government. It's true even on a personal, interpersonal level. We ought to have this in mind. The next Kinot is best described by a picture I'm going to show you. And just I want you to think about this picture and you say the Kinot. It's a picture of a U.S. soldier inspecting thousands of gold wedding bands taken from Jewish people by the Germans and stashed in the Hadron salt mines on May the 3rd, 1945. Thousands and thousands of rings. These are not the engagement rings. They're the wedding bands. And why do I make a distinction? It was on these rings that thousands, it's mamish handsful, it's a whole big thing of wedding bands were set on this. Hariat mekudeshet li b'chabad zo kedat Moshe Yisrael. How many times was the kiddushin defected on these little rings? And here's what became of them. Eicha Atzta is, we're asking the question, Hashem, we had such a good relationship with you. We had something going. We were in love together. And therefore we keep saying, Zechor Hashem me'ayalanu, which means remember what befell us. But I like to read it also a little bit based on this Kinot. Zechor Hashem me'ayalanu, God, remember what we had. Remember how it used to be. Remember what happened to us, how it fell so far, and how it used to be so good. And remember that in a wistful manner. Esther Farbstein quotes from a writer in Warsaw who was in the Warsaw Ghetto, Yechiel Mastbaum, who described his daughter's wedding during the war. God forbid one other of the couple could get killed, especially if the husband gets killed and the woman says she's going to be in a guna forever. So they wanted to outlaw weddings. At the end of this decided they're going to make a wedding. Yechiel Mastbaum's daughter was getting married. The couple wanted to get married immediately, perhaps sensing the end, and her father went along with the decision. A wedding day at a time like this, I reluctantly consented. They had difficulty finding a rabbi to officiate because people who looked like rabbis were especially liable to be abused. The groom himself was seized for forced labor on their wedding day. He arrived at the wedding at the last moment, beaten and wounded. This was not the end of their troubles. When they reached the bracha, Yotzer Ha'adam, creator of man, the people's emotions burst out and they gave vent to the shock they had experienced in their encounter with the Nazis, the embodiment of the bestial in man. The wedding ceremony, writes Yechiel Mastbaum, of my daughter, quickly turned into mourners' sackcloth and ashes. Not only the women, but even the men could not restrain themselves. Tears streamed down as on the night of Tisha B'Av, as at the time of a funeral procession, as after the death of a great Jewish leader. Before the ceremony was even over, someone warned that the Nazis were coming and everyone scattered. Because the wedding had not been completed and was therefore not halachically valid, they had to complete it a few days later. Henry Abramson is the dean of Lander College, one of the school, the Lander College, Touro College, Lander program there. And this year he published an article. He said he came across, from Bergen-Belsen, from the DP camp, he came across a prenuptial agreement. Now listen to this. It's not the halachic prenup we have today, Rahman al-Islam, because of terrible Chil Hashem involving Gittin, etc., that has to be prevented through that halachic prenup. The DP camp. As people were engaged in what Atina Grossman, the historian, writes, biological avenge, Jews affirming life in the most elemental manner by marrying and bearing children. By 1948, the DP camps witnessed a birth rate of 36 children per 1,000 women, approximately 7 times the rate for German women. The children were called Mashiach's Kinder because the children were born as part of the messianic redemption of the world. Here on the Bergen-Belsen Ksuba, there was a Magen David, which is an expression of that. He writes, Abramson, that he was asked to present at something called Project Witness Educators Conference on Women in the Holocaust. And he came across, in his research, a terse prenuptial agreement. The DP camps in Germany and Italy contained some 300,000 Jews, most of whom emerged from the death camps before the Nazis could complete their final solution. Many married before the war and could not determine whether or not their spouses were still among the living. Neither divorced nor widowed, the survivors remained agunas, chained to their former husbands and wives, unable to remarry under Jewish law. The fate of their spouses could be ascertained. The document I found, however, was not for women. It was something I'd never seen before. It was a sobering prenuptial agreement for a prospective groom who wishes to remarry after his wife disappeared in the maelstrom of the Holocaust. It is addressed to the Honorable Court of Justice established to address agunot in the central office of the British zone in Germany. And the form has the groom agreeing to abide by the dictates of the court should his first wife somehow emerge from the ashes of the Holocaust. The text reads in part, I, the undersigned, accept upon myself without any duplicity and with goodwill, without being coerced in any way, that if my first wife returns home, there's a blank space reserved for the groom to enter the name of the missing woman. Post-Holocaust prenuptial agreement involved the obligation to presume dead as well as to the living, that required the groom to inform my subsequent wife of this obligation prior to the chuppah. And if I fail to obey the dictates of the Bezdin, behold, I accept that the Bezdin may nullify my subsequent marriage as the court sees fit. One can only imagine tearful conversations between groom and bride, poised on the cusp of their blissful future together, as they reviewed the implications of this painful document. Hope inescapably mixed with tragedy, rebirth intertwined with death. Emotional heroism of these survivors must have been overwhelming. This is not a personalized handwritten document, Abramson says, reflecting the misfortune of a single family. It's a form letter that's reproduced for multiple uses. It has blank spaces, left unmarked, and proves silent witness to the thousands upon thousands of unspoken tragedies extending well beyond the war's end. I won't tell you the name because I don't know that they want it to be made public. When I was a rabbi in Fairfield, there was a couple there where each of the members of the couple were married before and had children before. In the case of the wife, she was actually inside the gas chamber and something malfunctioned and they let them out. These were normal people. It was nisim v'niflos that they were normal people. I remember seeing both of them smile at shul events. It was a nes nigla to see this. And they're married and had children. I don't know how many people in the shul knew. I knew. They'd each been married before. They each had children before. They had to start again. And that's what we're reading, page 158 in Kinot Zion. How could you have done the Zechor Shema Ayalam and not only remember but befall us, but remember actually how we were together, how we had a marriage together. How come you didn't remember our marriage together with that which was inscribed at Chorev, Mount Chorev at Har Sinai, which you wrote for the ones that you're meant to have so much compassion for. Page 158, Kinot Zion. Three separate caches of documents. Only two of them have been found until now. The third one was never found until today. And we have a book in English of the translation into English from the Yiddish of the writings of Rabbi Shimon Huber-Brown, Hashem Yikam Damo. Rabbi Huber-Brown was part of the Onik Shabbos. It was not per se a religious group. This book, Who Will Write Our History, written by Samuel Casso, who I just found out this summer is still alive. He's an Orthodox Jew. He davens in Hartford, Connecticut, and he's a professor at the university there. And in the book, Who Will Write Our History, there's not a film about it. I think some places in Chicago are showing it later today. It's about this attempt to try at least to document what's going on. Huber-Brown himself did not survive. Huber-Brown, to take an example, already in the first bombardment in 1939, his wife and his child were killed. And he remarried in the ghetto. And he was part of that deportation in the summer of 1942 that was killed in Treblinka. But we have his words. So he writes and documents all the aspects of religious life. That was his job because he was the rabbi of the group of historians. He was a historian in his own right. He explains, as soon as the war broke out, on the 17th of Elul, 5699, September 1, 1939, all the Jews were confident the Mashiach and his redemption would come in the year 5700 because there were a slew of allusions to that effect in holy books printed hundreds of years ago. There were, in addition, other such signs in holy books published a few decades ago, as well as popularly construed signs which transmitted orally. So, the earliest source stating that the redemption would come in the year 5700, the year Tafshin, is found in the commentary of Rav Yosef Yechia on the book of Daniel. This work is no longer extant. In the book Shalshal HaKabbalah by Gedaliah ibn Yechia, which has been printed in scores of editions in the last 300 years, the following is written in the Warsaw 1899 edition on page 64 under the entry for the Rambam. Quote, my father and teacher in his commentary in the book of Daniel proves that the end of days will be in the year 5700. This is the year 1939-1940, according to the general calendar. 3. The Otzi Yisrael Encyclopedia, edited by J.D. Eisenstadt, brings the following under the entry, end of days. Quote, the Kabbalists agree that the period in which we live is suited for the redemption of Israel. For the 10 supernal spheres reach perfection every 1,000 years. And if one deducts 3 spheres, which are the broken vessels from the year 6,000, this gives the year of redemption 5700. Since these holy books merely state the redemption will be in the year Tafshin, the textual allusion was as follows. We read in the Pasuk in Shir Ashir, Amar Oyev, Eredov Asik, Alik Shalatim Lemonafshe Rikharbi Tershimi Yadi. The 5 letters at the head of the first 5 words signify 5,000 years. Aleph, 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 5,000. The letters Taf, Shin, Shalal, Tivla, Emo at the beginning of the next word indicates the year 5,700. Letter Nun at the beginning of the next word signifies the month of Nisan. The letters Aleph and Chet of the next words signify Isru Chag, the day following the festival. And the letters Taf, Shin of the last 2 words signify Shuat Israel, the redemption of Israel. In short, the verse states that on the day after the festival in the month of Nisan, namely Pesach and the year Tafshin, the Jews will be redeemed. You understand what was going on here? People were saying to each other, it's terrible, these Nazis in Mashimam Samalik, but don't worry, Mashiach Zeit. Mashiach Zeit. Huberbrand writes, when the day after Pesach came and went, without the arrival of the Mashiach, people began to search for another date during the same year. Since the war began on the 17th of Elul, the date exactly 9 months later fell on the month of Parshat Kitavo El Haaretz. The Jews began to hope for Mincha time. When Mincha time came, they hoped for Motzei Shabbos. When the 3 stars began to sparkle in the sky, the lights were lit, Havdalah was recited, and the Mashiach still did not come. The mood turned despondent, but not for long. Soon a new sign was found. The redemption must occur in the year Tav Shin. You understand, everyone, what's going on over here? It's exactly what the Mekonim writes, that every year Klal Yisrael says, oh, it's going to be this year, oh, it's going to be this year. Huberbrand, not figurative, not symbolic, not memoirs. During the time of is Mamish writing a diary, what's going on, and it's buried in the Warsaw Ghetto ruins. The next sign consisted of the final letters of the words, Timcha et Zecher Amalek. You shall erase the memory of Amalek. The Hey of the first word, Timcha, ends with a Hey, that's 5,000 years. The Tuf of the second word, the Resh of the third word, and the Kuf of the fourth word amount to 700. This means that the memory of Amalek will be blotted out in the year 5700, as is well known. Hitler and Germany are Amalek. That's not a later projection. The people during the time of said, this is Amalek. When the year 5700 drew to a close and the Mashiach did not come, the search began for signs regarding the year 5701. The words of a certain Hasidic Rebbe were spread that, quote, when we begin to blow the shofar, the enemy will be blown away, end quote. In the name of the same rabbi, another sign of the Mashiach was quoted, Eshet Chayil Miyimtza. The word Eshet consists of the same letters as the year Taf Shin Aleph. In that year it was said, Chayil Miyimtza. No armies will be found anywhere. An authentic sign was found in the book Toldos Yaakov Yosef by Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Polnoi, one of the major disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. On the pasuk that when you shall number ki Tisha et Rosh B'nai Yisrael, he wrote when Tisha, the year Taf Shin Aleph, Tisha Taf Shin Aleph comes, it will be Rosh B'nai Yisrael. The Jews will lift up their heads and the Mashiach will come. Jews began to wait anxiously for the, oh, it's coming. And that's what the Mekonim is writing. They found the Torah Yonatan and Parshat Balotcha, Pasuk Chaf. It speaks of a nation, Magog, which will arise in the eve of the redemption. It will be phenomenally well armed, organized, and disciplined. And this nation will conquer many other nations and will subjugate them. And this nation will reach the land of Israel and wage war on it. At that time, all the soldiers of this nation will perish. The resurrection of the dead will occur, and Mashiach will appear. Then there were inauthentic signs that were concocted. A report spread that there was a book called Aluma by the great Kabbalist Rabbi Moshe. And it is written that in the days of the Mashiach, there will be a ruler of a certain land who will torture Jews greatly, will conquer many lands. Indeed, this ruler will be an evil spirit named Hitler. In this Sefer, it said this. It said Hitler's name, writes Hulubrand. Now listen to this. In the end, when the evil spirit Hitler wages war in the year 1940, he will be defeated and the Mashiach will come. But then, writes Hulubrand, as it turned out, there was no such statement in the entire book Aluma, and the sign was a total fabrication. After Pesach of 1941, there appeared handwritten flyers all over the ghetto, which were copied one from the other. The flyers ostensibly contained a text from the Sefer Eitanim. It was alleged and stated in this book that in the 22nd day of Iyar, 5701, the redemption would come. Jews awaited the date. The day passed. The redemption did not come. It then surfaced that there was no book with the name Sefer Eitanim in existence. We read together A'adah on page 162 in the art scroll Kinot. It's Kinachet. Adel Chuk Shemayim, Alei Tishamayim, Oyamach B'vit Hamayim, Achim V'Echil El Nipar, V'Chano El Nileh, Midbar V'Ke Iti, Iti, Chod Nevai, Egrom Shemot Al Havai, Arosh Shemit, En Yoshem V'Shayim, Adel Chulei, V'Hantziyei, Eid Onili, V'Van Amtseihu, Et Agayei, V'Ev Amtseihu, Akonei, Mitei Yadav Amtseihu. Going for the Israel, facing us, Messiah, and we thank you, Michelle, V'chai, v'chalachu, as a food, as a tea, v'chanan, and v'chachu, v'gan tini, v'hilau, tini, every mishpach, v'chati party, Next kina is on page 174, Eicha Yashva. Talk about a living memorial. Those bolded words are the names, the 24 mishmarot, the 24 units of Kohanim. And without this kina, there would not actually be pretty much any other living remnant of even the names of the 24 units of Kohanim. Remember, they serve in the Beit Mikdash. They didn't have everyone come at the same time, all the Kohanim. How do they organize it? 24 units, and you had miluim, reserves. They had to come up to Yerushalayim, etc. And they each one had a name. The commander of Yodpat, one of the names mentioned here, was none other than Yosef ben Matityahu, better known to most of us as Josephus Flavius. They were involved in doing whatever they could, all of these Kohanim, to fight tooth and nail against the Romans. They were not soldiers. The Romans were soldiers. And in the end, As we know, unfortunately, many of them were killed. It was a concerted campaign, we believe, by the Romans to kill off as many Kohanim as possible, recognizing that if they could kill all the Kohanim, the Jewish people would not have a religious center and not have religious people who could, in other words, effect their work in the Mikdash, in the temple. Therefore, they wouldn't want to rebuild anything to do there. And therefore, they would be able to assimilate all Jews, which makes the Kohanim Kedoshim in all communities so important, Leviim, Kohanim, etc. The commander in Yodpat was Josephus. And so goes the story, and again, it's strange. It's a story that has a lot of ambivalence about it, because one of our only sources outside of the Gemara and outside of Chazal for what happened in Bayit Sheni is from Josephus. Josephus apparently was engaged with his comrades when there was no hope left, what amounted to a suicide pact. But Josephus didn't die. He didn't kill himself. Josephus surrendered to the Romans. Not only that, but he was essentially commissioned by Titus, to be his historian. And so the works of Josephus Flavius are the works of a person who is beholden to not only an employer, but as the saying went in Rome, to a person with total legal authority over him, even of his life and death. And therefore, there is always a cloud hanging over the works of Josephus about the extent to which he wrote what amounts to a whitewash of what the Romans did. Still, we have a lot of history we can mine from it, but just to recognize that it's clouded. The history of Josephus Flavius is clouded. So I'll tell you the story of a Russian Jew named Vladimir Borisovich Elkin, who was born to a secular Jewish family in Kharkov in Ukraine. I've been to Kharkov. It's not a great vacation spot. I was there in 1999. The OU used to have a center there. The center was named for Joseph K. Miller, who was killed in the Pan Am bombing 103 in 1987. And the OU set up a center there in order to run a summer camp. So in 1999, I got to run that summer camp in the Ukraine, outside of Kharkov, but the office was in Kharkov. So this person was born in Kharkov, and he became interested in Judaism. And he ended up joining the Bnei Akiva movement. He learned Hebrew on his own. He studied mathematics and physics at the Kharkov University from 1987 to 1990. He got a BA in math. He founded the Association of Hebrew and Jewish Teachers during his time at university. And in 1990, he became, as a boy, the first thing that turned him on to the fact that he was Jewish and to have some pride in being Jewish was that he would read the works in communist Russia of Josephus Flavius. עוד בילדותי נחשפתי לסיפור של יוסף ומתתיהו ולמרד הגדול דרך רומן של יון פויכטוונגר. There was a novel that was written about Josephus, a Sofer Yehudi Germani, a German writer, Jewish writer, Leon Furchtwanger, who wrote a book about the Great. And he wrote a trilogy about the life of Josephus, based on the works of Josephus. וזה היה אחד הספרים המשמעותיים ביותר שבנו את הזהות היהודית שלי. This is one of the books that built my Jewish identity. בגלל האנטישמיות בברית המועצות, because of the anti-Semitism in Soviet Union. מעבר לידיעה שאני יהודי, לא ממש הבנתי מה זה אומר. Other than knowing that I was a Jew, I did not know what it meant. In December of 1990, Vladimir Borisovich Elkin made Aliyah with his daughter. He went to Hebrew University. He got a BA in history. He got an MA in history. He was then involved in academic Jewish and medieval studies. He went to study Yeshivat Har Etzion in 1995. Today, his name is no longer Vladimir Borisovich, but people call him Zev. Zev Elkin. Zev Elkin today is an Israeli minister, not only a member of the Knesset for the Likud, he's a member of Jerusalem Affairs and is the Minister of Environmental Protection. All from reading the works of Josephus, all from reading works about the Merid HaGadol. And take heed from that about the inspirational value also, even in reading about these works and the sadness thereof. We also find there's something else here that is redemptive. One of the blocks in Auschwitz I is run by Yad Vashem. It's been that way for many years. So, see Alfred's here, so people from the trip, from the mission. So we went into this block. I won't tell you everything in the block, I don't have time, but at the end, there's a massive room. It has a very, very, very long, you can't really tell what it is. There's a little sign on it that tells you what it is. It's pages and pages and pages and pages. That must be about this big, maybe a bit taller, and they're elevated off the ground. They're on a stand, going on two sides. It's called the Book of Names. Yad Vashem has collected 4.5 million names. That's all we have so far that's been cataloged. And we spent a good few minutes, I wish we would have had longer, to actually literally everyone was walking through, flipping the pages to find, you can find your last name, and you can find all the people with the same name who were murdered. And many people from our trip, from our mission, were able to find the names of their own relatives that own the same last name. When we came outside, I pointed out exactly what we're going to read today by Mincha from the book of Yeshaya. So says Hashem to those who are unable to have children. They're the ones who keep Shabbos, those who are guarding Shabbos, those who have chosen that which I desire and who hold fast to my covenant. I will place in my house and in my walls a memorial and a name. I give them a name forever that will never be cut off. And those are the names that are there. So many of those people have absolutely not one person left even to say a Kaddish word. Nobody left. Not have. Page 174, Kina Yud. Eicha Yashva Chatzara Shalom. Eicha Yashva Chatzara Shalom. Tamamron, Yipino Sei Haron. No Yishmirotam, Kohan Bnei Aaron. Kusabai, Yisrael. ותבכה חומש בספרים, ירקועים ונובי ביום הכיפורים, לא נשחטו פרחים כצפירים, נודו כסיפורים כהן הציפורים, גלתם ארץ הקלה וכושתו, ובמעשור ושמיטה פרוש, ותנפות לבוש, פתם אדיה ופשטו, ככה היכה שמות מפרץ כפור, Tilo, Huna, Gabus, Tilo, Mistilo, Hoyoy, Malivino, Hamilton, Tilo, oh, more nothing. Utlu, Stella, and Bay, Lachen. It's a, oh, right, Rosa. Welcome for Tapasman, Shanazan, Shmajibo. Ata, no, the Mego, Lanabaros, Sulu, Rupsu, of Hanya, Kate Hata, Amber the Hills, the Hilgiga, the Tita, Positive, who came, Hookna, Magizael. Niks meer non heel gevaarlijk is. Toen altijd echt niet voor tegen. Nou, dan heb ik on the water, walk out heel. Hey, niet hard bij. Zo, iets voor. Ik wil aan jou, voor jou tegen door aan de boer. Kies zo je shit, het giboor in die boer. Het zei, we hebben je kaboer, en ik kaboer. Allemaal, Kinot. הכניסו אל כנot, בואי נבל אל כנot, ודום מכנot, השברת, אמרו מים צפד, כסף החרס חיפד, וחיזוק מוסר ופד, מרד ונרפד ונצפד. אמרו משמיע, ראיתי תבון, כאן בעיוורון, שיגעון, מגר עלי יבונו, ונבי ננון, שמר בית כהן נאון, נסתפו, עוון נכעבתו, שבתי, אמונה נדלי, אני נעתי, וצחצי בלי מוגב, נוסע עלי, תנה, נשמרת ישדה, סילה אבירה, להרעיה, ספרי, אגידה, ויולה, כבויה, מרד, מדיעות, הגריה, ונשמרה, וכי חלשו חושנים, יחום אני, וכל היחר וחנית, ובית צמוד אני, מצורת תוכנית עצור, הרסה ואין דעת שלה, לא האמין על השקעים שלך, הושבתה ברית מלך בין שמן ומולך בראש ממלך צריך הוא אדוני לפי ומרת ואורו הר יסוד בה ותנור עוז וזמבר קים עולה נחרת קץ וירז מזרח קראת וצורי וכולי בערה וקוננתי ויער בערה וכבנר אדולי כמר וכברה מחלה ואי קיבוס ארתי כמיה ודוניה כמיה Holy gets on the top of your no Hamilio, Hamilio, Shamochi is hunting, so Hamilio is without Rumio, that's the Hamilio, so Satan, Hamilio, Kirachana, the Fire, Hana, Avo, Samoni, Habani, Visatu, Esir Choyani, Motsim, Hinto, Tia, Koski, Tia, there's a Tutainu, the Fria, the Red, the Tainu, the Ked, and Turia, Shulchan Chat, Aria Sulay, Hamat, Yo, the Kinot on page 182 has an update for 5779. This Kinot on page 182, Kinot Yud Aleph, Kinot 11, is about Yoshiyahu HaMelech. Yoshiyahu HaMelech was a bright light at a very dark time for Klal Yisrael. It was rampant idolatry in Yerushalayim itself. And the cult of idolatry involved murder as part of its cult, terrible things. And I will share with you a brief story about it because I think it's instructive to understand. This is also part of the description of the Khurban. I'm going to tell you the update for 5779 on this story, which is, I guess, on one level not surprising, but another level, it's unbelievable. The king gathered all of the elders of Yehud Yerushalayim. Of the covenant, meaning the Sefer Torah, which was found in the house of Hashem. So the king stood on the platform and he made the covenant before Hashem to follow after Hashem, to keep his mitzvahs, all of his testimonies, all of his edicts, with a full heart, with a full soul, to uphold this, everything written in the book. Everyone stood as he made this covenant. The king commanded Chilkiyahu as the Kohen Gadol, all of the other Kohanim, and all the people who were there, who were the underlings, people who were working there, either as part of the Mikdash or for the kingdom, to take out of the sanctuary of Hashem all of the appurtenances that were related to Baal and Asherah and which were made to the stars and constellations. Where were all of these things burned? Outside of Yerushalayim, in Shadmot Kidron. You've seen Shadmot Kidron. If you've ever been to Yerushalayim, you know exactly where it is. You just don't know it's that. It's when you're standing in the old city, if you're able to look out and see Har HaZeitim, so the valley in between the old city and Har HaZeitim, that's Nachal Kidron, that's where it is. So that's where this transpired, they burnt it. And how did they get the stuff there? Probably they threw it down from the Har HaBayit. They chucked it out. And on our mission just now, we actually walked around the walls of Yerushalayim, including the eastern wall, which is right just there is the valley is right there. We walked along it to see the eastern wall of the old city. And so it continues to describe what they did, how they cleaned up, everything they took care of there. They took care of the houses of ill repute. There were brothels all over the place. Where were they? They were in the house of God. They killed off all of the priests the history of the Kamarim, who were engaged in all of this. They took the Asherah that were in the Beit Hashem outside of Yerushalayim from Nachal Kidron, they burnt it. And Nachal Kidron, they burnt it into dirt, ashes. Yeah. Then it describes V'timer hatofet asher begei ben Hinom levilti lahavir ish et beno ve'et bito ba'esh lamolech. They defiled the Tofet, which is in the valley known as Gei Ben Hinnom. If you want to know where Gei Ben Hinnom is, you also know where it is if you've been to Yerushalayim. It's when you're coming down after the Begin Center. If you go down near the Mount Zion Hotel, I think there's a valley there. That's Gei Ben Hinnom. If you go to Shar Yafo, to the Jaffa Gate, you come out of Mamilo and you're going to go into Shar Yafo. If you would look off to your right, down there, that's Gei Ben Hinnom. That valley is Gei Ben Hinnom. How close is it to the old city? It's mamish right there. And they were in Tami the Tofet there, where people would bring their sons and their daughters to put in the fire of Molech. The Radak explains that this place was called Tofet. They had people standing by who would use they called it Tofet. A Tofet is a drum. They would stand with drums and marching drums, hundreds of people banging drums rhythmically when they were passing the child into the fire. And it would cause his heart to sigh, and he would try to rescue the child. It was a valley. Describes, Radak quotes from the Medrash of Chazal of what it looked like, the idol itself. The idol itself was a very large structure, presumably made of metal. It had a face of an ox, and it had human hands that were sticking out. They would light it on fire underneath it. And then the child would be immolated right there. So that's the description of what's going on in Yerushalayim. And Yoshio HaMelech came, and king after king, some abetted it, some encouraged it. Yoshio said, no more of this, and he destroyed it. The next pasuk, he destroyed the horses which the kings of Yehuda had given to the sun. There were chariots, presumably they were made of gold, and the chariots were actually with golden horses and golden chariots that were in the direction of the sun. Now, you've been to the Kotel, you know you're at the Kotel HaMaravi. That's the western wall. So you know actually the other side, obviously the eastern side. So the Beit HaMikdash is actually, when you go and you're standing there, you actually, if you were in the Beit HaMikdash, you'd be facing west. They built these horses and chariots facing east toward the sun. And the kings, who were idolaters, some of them, would stand in the chariots in the morning with sunrise to greet the sun. So this was destroyed. All of this was destroyed. And it was destroyed, and where was the destruction taken? To the Lishka of Natan Melech. Natan Melech. On March 31st of this year, media reported that actually they found right there, where in Ir David, right there, the seal of the signet ring of Natan Melech. It actually is inscribed, Natan Melech, Eved HaMelech. You can see the picture. This inscription is found. The burnt clay impression is the first archaeological evidence of the biblical name Natan Melech. These are not just another discovery, said archaeologist Yiftach Shalev of the Israel Antiquities Authority. They paint a much larger picture of the era of Yerushalayim. According to Shalev, while both discoveries are of immense scholarly value as inscriptions, their primary value is their archaeological context. What is important is not just they were found in Yerushalayim, but that they were found inside their true archaeological context, Shalev told the Times of Israel. Many other seals and seal impressions have been sold on the antiquities market without any thought to provenance. This is an in situ find, and it serves to connect between the artifact and the actual physical area it was found in. And where was it found? It was found in a large two-story First Temple structure that dig archaeologists have pegged as an administrative center. It is not a coincidence that the seal and the seal impression are found here. In other words, they found only the seal. They found a place that's called the Lishka of Natan Melech. Professor Yuval Gadot of Tel Aviv University points out that this area of the city of David becomes a central administrative center of Yerushalayim. It's constructed with finely cut ashlar stones. And it illustrates the westward move of the administration. The multi-room large structure bears clear signs of the destruction in the 6th century BCE, which likely corresponds to the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586. The destruction is evident through large stone debris, burnt wooden beams, and numerous charred pottery shards, all indications that it survived an immense fire. That is actually this Kina, based on Yoshiyahu. We now have the signet ring of Natan Melech and probably the building in which this transpired, this destruction transpired. The story of the Kina and why it's a lamentation is that as a young man in his early 30s, Yoshiyahu tragically makes a mistake. Yoshiyahu gives him advice, he doesn't listen, and he goes out to battle against the Egyptians. The Egyptians were not trying to fight the Jewish people. They were Paro Necho was trying to fight actually the Babylonians. And he was on his way up. He needed to pass through the Holy Land as a pass-through to walk on the highway. And Yoshiyahu Melech said, our generation, we've done tshuva. Our generation is untouchable. Our generation, we're not going to let anybody pass through our land as soldiers, and maybe they'll pillage. So it says in this king of Lo Shema L'Choz L'Shuv Achorayim, he didn't listen to the seer, to Yirmiyahu, his friend and his Rebbe, who told him, stand back. It's a mistake about the generation's level. He thought there's so many Baalei Tshuva, what could go wrong? It's, as the expression went in America a few years ago, too big to fail. Eicha Rabba writes, that's Yirmiyahu saying to Yoshiyahu, Kach mekublanim Yeshaya Rebbe. I heard from my Rebbe Yeshayahu, he told him in circumstances, but he didn't hearken to what he said. But rather, Rabbi Moshe Rabbeinu, didn't he say in the parsha the Cherev lo tavor ba'artzechem, a sword shall not pass through the land? Remember that's in parsha B'chukotam, when the brachas that can accrue to the Jewish people who do everything right. There's brachas. One of them is a sword will not pass through your land. The Chaber shel to Rasha or Veret ba'artzi v'tchumi. You think I'm going to let Yoshiyahu says after the Tshuva movement? I'm going to let a wicked person bring his army through? No way. But writes the Medrash, he didn't realize that even though there was a great public campaign, the private campaign was less successful. And it describes here how the inspectors would come to a house in Yerushalayim and rid it of all its idolatry. But as they said goodbye, the inspectors would be shown the door, and the person in the house would say to the guards, take care, and would close the pocket door, would slide the doors closed. And on the back of the door inside the house, the two sides of the idol would be connected when the door closed. And there was one idol left in each home that did not really do tshuva. And sadly, Yoshiyahu Melech goes out to battle, and he thinks Hashem is with him, and Yirmiyahu is telling him it's a big mistake, please don't go. And they have the sichsuch back and forth, the Rebbe and the Talmud have an argument. And as is described here, unfortunately, and described in the Navi and Sefer Malachim and Sefer Yirmiyahu both, Yoshiyahu Melech is killed. And that was the last hope, maybe for tshuva, of a tshuva campaign that could have been successful later. And so sadly, unfortunately, when that happened, hope died with Yoshiyahu Melech. And that's what we're reading now on page 182 in Kinot Yod Aleph, knowing now that we have the Chotam, the Bula of Natan Melech, Evet HaMelech.
אותות קינות ובת מחולי, עת שחר מחולי, זמותי כבר יעילי, נשאתי ונשאתי נותה שלחלי. The next Kina Yud Bet, found on page 188, includes a line in it. First of all, right at the beginning, Aliyah Sheta Avta Adlo Breshit in Kise Kavod L'Tzarfo. Your tent that you desired before creation, together with the glorious throne, to combine the two. It's the idea that the Gemara Masechet Pesachim Daf Nun Daled describes that there were several things that were created before the world was created. Shiva Dvarim Nivru Kodem Shenivra Olam, the Elohim. 7 things were created before the world itself was created, and these are they: Torah, Tshuva, repentance, Eden, Gehenna, the Garden of Eden and its opposite, Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, Ushmo Shel Mashiach, the name of Mashiach. All of those things created before the world itself was created. This is a mystical idea, somewhat challenging to try to understand what it means. We can certainly understand the idea that there's something cosmic that changed with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. In this Kina, we'll see various people personified. They're coming, brought to life, as it were. They're coming to protest and to mourn. Avram Avinu comes to mourn. And Hashem asks him, "What are you doing here, my beloved one? Mali yedidi po." It describes Miyeta Kitzipor Boded al Gag Maret Soreach. Hashem, you became like a bird, a lonely bird that's on a rooftop, that's just crying out bitterly. And this is the description as well. And Chazal, it's based on the pasuk from Yirmiyahu, Mali Yedidi Biveti. And it's the description that indeed Avram Avinu himself is, as it were, arguing with the Almighty. But how could this be that there's a destruction that's taking place? Amar Avram Lifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, says Hashem, says Avram Avinu to the Holy One, blessed be He. Mipnei ma higleita et banai mesartem didei umot v'haragum b'chol mitot meshunot v'chrafta beit hamikdash. How could it be, Master of the universe, you're exiling my children, you're putting them in the hands of the nations of the world, killing so many of them with such grotesque deaths. You destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, Makom she'aleket Yitzchak b'ni Olah lefanecha. I even offered my son Yitzchak as an Olah offering for you.
Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu Avram, Banecha Chatu v'Avra Kol HaTorah. The children of Avraham, I'm sorry to say, but they violated the entire Torah. Val Chafbet Otiyot Shabbat, they violated the 22 letters of the Torah, 22 letters in the Aleph Bet. They violated them all. It says in the book of Daniel, V'Chayisol Avru Toratecha, all of Israel has violated and abrogated the Torah. Amar Avram. Avram said, L'fnei Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel Olam, Mei mi'id bahem, B'Yisrael she'avru Toratecha, who testifies against the Jewish people? Amar lo, said Hashem, Tavot Torah v'te'id bahem B'Yisrael, let the Torah come forward and testify against the Jewish people. Miyad ba'a Torah laha'id bahem. Immediately the Torah came forward and was going to prosecute against the Jewish people. Amar la Avram, Avram Avinu said to the Torah, Biti, at ba'a laha'id bahem B'Yisrael, she'avra mitzvotecha v'ein lach boshech ani mipanai. Avram said, my daughter, you're coming to testify against the Jewish people that they violated your mitzvahs. You're not embarrassed in front of me? Zichru yom shechzircha HaKadosh Baruch Hu kol umma v'lashon v'ratzu l'kableich ad shebo b'nei lahar Sinai v'kiblu otcha v'kibluch. Do you remember the day when Hashem, the Holy One, blessed be He, went from each nation and no one wanted to accept you? Only my children accepted you at Har Sinai. They brought you honor. V'achshav at ba l'hoy b'hem b'yom tzarata. Once the Torah heard this, the Torah itself stood to the side. The Medrash goes on to describe various other ways that Avram Avinu was trying to negotiate with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. I'll share with you just the Gemara from the Masechet Megillah toward the end of the Masechta. We just finished this in the Daf HaShavua program, so some of you will remember it. Without getting onto the background, just describes Rabbi Ami teaches, Rabbi Ami, who by the way is buried in Bavaria. If not for the Ma'amado, for the groups of Yisraelim who would gather in the cities and in Bate Knesiot and in Yerushalayim, if they were part of that particular mishmar that was going to do the avoda, and they were reading from Masa Breshit every day of the week that the Kohanim were serving, if not for them, Lo Nitkam Shemayim Va'aretz. If not for the covenant of day and night, basically the universe could not subsist. So it says in the Torah, Avram Avinu asked the Holy One, blessed be, how I know that I will inherit it. Amar Avram Lifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel Olam. Ribono shel Olam, the verse said, Avram to the Holy One, blessed be His name. Let's say the Jewish people sin, you want to make them Dor Hamabul, the generation of the great flood, or of the generation of dispersion. Hashem said, no, I'll never do that. How will I know this? How will they know this? Amarlo said, Hashem to Avram, etc. Take the following offerings and basically split them in half, the covenant between the parts. Asking the verse. All of this is true when there's still a Beit HaMikdash. What's going to happen to Jewish people? There's no Beit HaMikdash. There aren't offerings to be offered as a guarantor of this, the continuation of the Jewish nation, the continuation of the world entire. Marlo, don't worry, says God to Avram Avinu. Grade for them the order of the offerings. Kolzman shekorin bahen, malani aleihen ki ilu makrivin lifnei lefanai korban umocha min al kol avonoteihen. I made a Seder Korbanot all the while that they'll read through the Seder Korbanot. I will accord, it says Hashem, just the reading of the words as if they've actually offered the offerings, and I'll forgive them for all of their sins. It's from this that we have in our Seder that every day a Jew should recite, if not all of Korbanot, at least to recite the Parshat. Jews standing by for other Jews. A certain sense of the ma'amadot taking place with that, and there are hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world, millions of Jews around the world, of all stripes and walks of life, davening. We said we're going to make change to our davening, institutionalized, if you will. We must be that everyone who davens for the Amid should make sure they're going to say the Parshat Tamid. Everyone in our shul should say it, that it appears in the Siddur, in our Art Scroll Siddur, not accidentally on page Lev, page 32, and that it's actually the Sin of the Shulchan Aruch. At least that should be recited. For those of us who don't say Al Korbanot, I still don't say Al Korbanot myself. I wouldn't someone else that I myself don't do. But at least to say the Parshat Tamid, very, very important, including that last pasuk from the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, which is itself an allusion to Akedat Yitzchak. I'm going to repeat one thing I said last year because I think it's germane to the emotion of this kina, and then we'll recite it. And that is the description of the words "Nita kitas b'chalal." It's based on the pasuk we just read today from Yirmiyahu. You became like a drifter in space. God, you're like a drifter. You're just adrift. Tell me if this medrash resonates for you. It certainly resonates for me. Doma l'chacham shahayu l'shnei banim. Mashkim v'molicham l'beit ha-sefer. There was a chacham who had two sons. He would get up every morning, he would take them to school. Ma'ariv molicham l'beit ha-mishta. Every night he would bring them back home to the house of feasting. Achar yamin metu lo shneihem. After some period of time, both of his sons died. But the routine continued. Mashkim v'holech l'beit ha-sefer u'bocha. Ma'ariv holech l'beit ha-mishta u'bocha. In the morning, he would still walk to school, but now by himself, he would cry. At night, he would with Moses Shamberia. So too, since the destruction, so to speak, in the morning, would go early to Tzion and to see if there's any Jews there. Wouldn't find anybody there. Mariv, in the evening, Holech Yerushalayim Ravakesh Adam Yisrael Shama. You would find in the city of Yerushalayim to find a Jew there. Moses Shamberia. Therefore, it says, "The Evke Yomim V'Layla Et Chalalei Bat Ami." I cry every day and every night over those who were killed among our nation. And to recognize, as we say this kina now, about Aliyah Sher Ta'avta, I mentioned last night on Shabbos, we are still not in the time of rebuilding. We're not in the time of complete rebuilding. But now I hope HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Yerushalayim, Yer Kodesh, and you can see the thousands and tens of thousands of people who come to Yerushalayim every single day and every single night. And I described, hopefully in a positive vein, how crowded it was at the Kotel the Friday night we were there from the mission. It was unbelievable how many Jewish people were there. It was astounding to see the groups from all over the world, some of whom didn't seem to have a clue what it means to be Jewish, but something pulled their heartstrings to Yerushalayim. I hope HaKadosh Baruch Hu has some nechama, that you can come to Yerushalayim, still the Har HaBayit, Shul and Hilchubo, the fox is running on it. But still down, but now down below, Klal Yisrael's come back. Maybe it's a Chatzi Nechama, maybe for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We recite now this kina, which appears again, page 188. It's kina Yud Bet, or Aliyah Sher Ta'avta. Kisechov Tzorfo, Lamalanetz, Suda B'Yishorim. Yeito, Kirov, Otya, Ashta Berganto, At Malifo. Oleshe Komanto, the Itonei Eretz, Cheret Admifu, Lamalanetz, Tzumad Yotzak, Yeito, Sipo Pedenotia, Answer Malifo. Oleshe Patsto, Roman, Tzir, Atamod Malifo, Lamalanetz, Arbia, Yedo, the Sonnet side, Aye, Ivu, Moshapo, Oleshe Nachito, Bonavivot. Bezor sheyeshno po, info, lama lanetzah. Boaz biad moribim, neit gibor lo yuchal hoshiach. Malachafo mi lechafo, ahol yasher kivanta mul machon b'shikachan ofet kufo. Lama lanetzah, biad yidirim. Yeita kitas b'chala, yegod navi. Damta Enko, Holy Sechinito, as Mipo, Lamalanetza, Zunak Bianzarin, Yea, the Kipati, Yotze Hutsa, Lo Ava, a holy Yasherhanta, the Hashlit Bolafanefa, Gorapo Lamalanetza, Duchabiad, Yea, the Gerba Oretzinanta, Bonaso, and Wolf. He a holy Yasheba Alvon Bitzi, Suppose and Haysko. Lamalanetza, Pupavia, Umor, Yeta Korea Malone, O Nil Hafo, Lipo, Hodor, Nodo, Kitspo, Kupo, Amen, Lipo, Om, Shanta like Apo, Zot Alil Kifi, Hakut, Hapo, Refo, Ati, Tuchak, Yagab Apple. Ato We're turning now to page 226 for one of the most the beginning of one of the most, there's several, graphic and very, very challenging Kinot to read even, because we're not talking about places per se or about events that are just named, but we're describing in gory detail, that's literally gory detail, what the enemies did to Klal Yisrael. The perspective here is actually focused very much on the enemy, on Titus, Yamachim Zikro. It's graphic descriptions of both the violence and the fear. I'm going to tell you a personal story now that I have not shared previously. In all the years of doing Kinot, but I think this is the year. The story really begins with why I decided it should be this year because of this heritage mission that we took. I was walking in one of the towns, talking with the guide who came from Eretz Yisrael. He's an American who made Aliyah, Jonathan Deutsch. And we were talking just as we were on the way to see some things in this town. I think it was in Wansut. I said to him, my family is three of my grandparents born in Montreal, one of my grandparents born in Russia, but left Poland, and today it's Ukraine. He said, yes, it's a familiar story. So he said, what town is it? I said, it's a town, today's in Ukraine, it's called Kovel. He stopped in his tracks, he looked at me, he said, Kovel? My family's from Kovel. He said, in fact, I'm taking your group this week. Next week, toward the end of the week, I'm traveling back to Poland with my family. For the first time, we're going to drive to the border between Poland and Ukraine. And 45 minutes from the border, and you got to send me some pictures, please, something. He promised. Nadar Vishilem, he sent me some pictures. So I want to share this with you because I think it's important that you understand it. Also, today it's in Ukraine. Let me break off here to point out, and it's crucial to realize that Ukraine is a very big part of this story. That the Israeli ambassador to the Ukraine told Ukrainians this year, just now, Tafshin Ayin Tet, in late December, he said in a public speech, he was interviewed on local radio, his name is Yoel Leon. He said to them, I want you to understand your nationalist heroes are our horrors. He mentioned figures such as Stepan Bandar and Roman Shukevich, who are seen as heroes who fought for Ukraine's independence. We see them as killers of Jews. Of course, Khmelnytsky in Kiev. I was in Kiev in 2011. There was a massive statue for Bogdan Khmelnytsky, Sheikh Atzamot, riding on a horse. The original plan for his monument was of him on the horse. It's in the city square. They're not hiding it. He's a national hero, Mamish national hero. It was going to be, the horse was kicking 3 people off a cliff. A Jesuit something or other, a Russian, and the third one in the middle was a Jew. That was the original monument. And instead, they decided they relented. The monument instead is Bogdan Khmelnytsky. The Khmelnytsky massacre, we spoke about it 2 years ago. I did an in-depth session on it in the Kinot. Zero Tach V'Tat, 1648, 1649. Rav Nosson Nata of Hanover wrote about this in his book, Yava and Hamatzula, by this man and his underlings, by the Cossacks. I mention all of this because you think Cossacks are from the 1640s. My Zaydal Hashem, whose memory I'll look today, Yaakov ben Shmuel, Zichron Livracha, was one of the greatest influences on my life, my Zayda Jack Filler. When he was 3 or 4 years old, Cossacks came to his town of Kovel and kidnapped him. And they put him on a horse and they rode away with him. Usually, when that happened, the kids didn't come home. By some nace, no other word for it, they ended up taking him to a police station that they overtook. And they gave him, the little boy, they gave him food. He said he was 3 or 4 years old. But remember, they gave him food to bring back to his family. I don't remember now if his father was still alive or had died. His father died. The mother was left with 8 children. He was one of 8 children, my Zayda. My Zayda told me that he remembers when the soldiers came, must have been 1919 or so, 1918, 1919, we know now because of the Ukrainian, all the wars in Ukraine. They were quartered in the house. They put the mother, the 8 children, and possibly the father, I never clarified with them, in one bedroom. My uncle Joe, Zichron Livracha, was a baby in a drawer from a chest of drawers, together with my uncle Herschel, Zichron Livracha. These are all vivid memories. Anyway, a lot to say about Ukraine and the ideas of the, not ideas, the description of the unbelievable massacres that took place there, 1918, 1919, 1921. There were various massacres that transpired in Kiev and its surrounding environs that are only not reported, they're underreported, even though we have the numbers and we have many of the names, because the Shoah overtook and people don't talk about it anymore. But these are horrible. Pruskarov pogrom in early 19th people. And the estimates of the totals of the people who were killed in these are, by some estimates, ranging into the hundreds of thousands of people who were killed. Anyway, one of the pictures that he sent me, Jonathan Deutsch, was a picture of what's called the Great Shul, the Great Synagogue of Kovel. I remember when my Zayda Zichron Livracha told me, I didn't understand what he was talking about, but he said, oh, there was a great shul in Kovel. I used to daven in it when I was a little boy. My Zayda left Europe in 1926. He was 16 years of age. His mother gave him whatever little money she had. They say the equivalent of $4 Canadian, was always the story. And he came to Canada by himself, 16 years of age, and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. One meal a day. In the morning for breakfast, he used to eat one meal. He was a kosher butcher. He got meat because he thought it would hold him hearty. And he brought over his entire family. The remaining, his father had died, but his mother and all of his siblings he rescued. Okay, my Zayda told me, I remember him telling me, he said, the great shul where we davened, he said to me, my Zayda inherited that land. And he came to ask the Rebbe, the Trisker Ruv was his name, Reb Nachum Moshe Twersky. They called him Trisker Ruv, and he was asked, what should I do with this land? And the Rebbe told him, donate it to build a shul here in this spot. Mazeda told me there's a shul in Kovel. To me, it was a mythical place until I saw this picture. The great synagogue was built on the land that my great-great-grandfather donated, apparently. So I was wondering, there's no shuls in Kovel? So I did some research. There was a massive fire in the early 1870s, and it destroyed much of the town. And they rebuilt the shul. 1878 was the rebuilding project of the great shul of Kovel. Why am I telling you the whole story about Kovel this time? By the time of the arrival of World War II, there were 18,000 Jews living in Kovel. It was not a shtetl with one street. It had Hashomer HaTzair, and it had Hasidim walking around. It had Zionist movements, and it had Yiddishist poets, and it had people who were very religious, people who were anti-religious. The whole kit and caboodle was all in one place, in one town, in Kovel. How do I know this? You can do this too. Do this afternoon. Go to a website called jewishgen.org. Also, Kehila links. You'll find there, you can type in the town. If you have a family that comes from Europe, many communities made Mimurbuchen, memory books. And you can look up the community and find, in many cases, the history that was written by the survivors of this place. Sometimes the only living monument left, aside from the Jews who survived, is online. Okay. So this is the story. I don't want to tell you all the whole, we don't have time for the whole story about the Nazis arriving and the whole thing. We have testimony of what happened when the destruction time period came. And part of it was that they put hundreds of Jews before they killed them, they put them inside the great synagogue, in that shul. There's a survivor named Ben Sion Sher who testifies in the book, Sefer Kovel, which is, I once held it in my hand at the University Library. I don't have access to it now. It's a thick book, which is the memory book for this community. In a section called Thus Was the City Destroyed. Opinion was divided among us, he writes. Some said that the workers and professionals would stay alive, and others said that it would be a complete slaughter. We would all be obliterated. The second opinion won, and we began to prepare for what would come. There were some excellent professionals in the ghetto, carpenters, blacksmiths, builders. They began to build bunkers under the sidewalks and the streets and secret hiding places in the attics. At night, we would hear the muffled sound of hammering. One night, Avram Gunik said to me, "Do you hear the sounds of work?" Gunik's son-in-law served in the police force, and from him we knew that there was a big plan for the preparation and installation of the bunkers. He told us, "Don't be under any illusions. The situation is dire. The Germans are planning to wipe out the last remaining vestiges of the Jews of the city." We called one of the carpenters to explain to us why they were building bunkers. His advice was to build a secondary wall, a double wall, connected to the oven, and people would enter the space through the opening of the oven. He also advised us to hide the part that was removed between the first and second walls and to cover the opening with planks so that if, God forbid, our hiding place was discovered, we could quickly flee to the attic. It seemed to us a good idea. The carpenter took down some planks from the Talmud Torah from the house of study of the followers of Stephen and built the wall. He covered it in plaster, and the wall became an integral part of the room and did not rouse any suspicion. According to the capacity, we could hide only 12 people, but with the cramming and squeezing, 18 people would fit. On the 6th of Elul, we went into the space behind the wall. The ghetto was in turmoil. We heard shouts and terrifying howls. They were forcing people into vehicles. Fritz Mante, who was he was one of them, knew about the bunkers, and he decided to destroy them once and for all. Children played a very tragic role in the discovery of the bunkers. More than once, a child burst into tears and endangered the lives of all. The bunker dwellers would attack the parents of the child. "Because of your children, we will all go to hell." The poor parents, with no other choice, were forced to send their children out of the bunker. When Mante saw Jewish children wandering about, he understood that the parents must be somewhere close by, and in that way he would locate the bunker and take those hidden inside out to be killed. We stood in the hiding place for 12 days with no food or water. During that time, Mante emptied almost the entire ghetto under the ground. He seized 300 people and took them to the great synagogue, and from there to their destruction. Mante and his band of murderers sniffed around our hiding place. The head thief stamped his foot and said, "There are Jews hiding here." The smell of sweat coming through the wall of our hiding place worked against us. From the smell, the murderer assumed there were living people in the place. Killers cut away the floor, turned the entire house upside down. They didn't find a thing, and so the day passed safely. The next day they came back. "The Jews are here," Mante shouted in a hysterical voice. They began destroying the walls. They ripped out one wall and were unsuccessful. But when they broke into the wall of our hiding place, one plank fell and we were exposed. In this Kinot, we're going to hear about the boots of Titus. It actually will describe his stomping boots and making scratches on the floor, the stone floor of the Beit HaMikdash. And to understand this, and also what appears in this Kinot, which is really very, very hard to even wrap your head around, it mentions children. Hundreds of children, Jewish children, were taken in Bayit Sheni. V'shilchum Eretz Utz b'shalosh sfinot. Children being taken to Eretz Utz. And Eretz Utz is the stand-in so often for the land of Rome. Why is it called Eretz Utz? Among other reasons, very simply, because there was a man who came from Utz, and his name was Eov. The Gemara Masechet Gittin describes that the children realized that they were going to be taken for immoral purposes, to be abused in Rome, and made a decision that they were going to essentially end their lives in order not to be taken for that purpose. The Gemara in Bava Batra, the Gemara in Gittin, excuse me. And without reading it all inside now, it's described vividly in this Kinot. They decided Eov lived. He lived in Eretz Utz. When did he live? Did he live in the times of Abraham? Did he live in the times of Yitzchak? The times of Yaakov? Was he in the time of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim? Who was he? When did he live? The answer at a certain level is he lived at all these times. He lives continually whenever things happen that leave us with questions that we simply cannot answer. The children are on their way to Eretz Utz. They decided to jump ship in order not to have to undergo the horrific sufferings that they would be subjected to if they were taken there. This fellow who wrote this testimony, Ben Sion Sher, continues. Next to the great synagogue, where all these Jews were packed in, stood a force of Ukrainian policemen who who checked us and emptied our pockets. When we entered, we found all sorts of people, women, children, and infants in the shul. We were ordered to squat with our heads down and between our legs. Anyone who raised his head could expect a bullet from the murderers. Only mothers who held infants in their arms were allowed, with no other choice, to sit upright because the murderers were not interested in committing mass murder inside the walls of the synagogue. For the same reason, they allowed the children to wander and stroll about. Children of this city, my heart goes out to you. Who will give validity to your sorrow and grief? Oy, the lamentation that we said for your great sorrow. Blood dripped from my heart when I saw the tears spilling from their eyes. The children wandered through the hall of the synagogue with bowed heads, looking at the people who had been brought low and crying bitterly. No, that's not my father. Later they approached a group of women, looking into their lowered faces, and cried loudly, no, that's not my mother. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Mante arrived and ordered us to get up and gather into one corner. He counted the people and wrote the number in his notebook. He separated out 35 men who looked healthy and put them in a different corner. The vehicle came and collected them, and they then set off in the direction of the cemetery. Mante accompanied them. When they arrived, they were ordered to dig a pit. The pit was 3 meters deep. Its length and width were determined based on the number of victims gathered in the synagogue that day. The death of that group was easy, quote unquote. When they finished digging, Mante ordered them to face the pit. Then he killed each and every one of them with a shot to the brain with his Nagant pistol. When we arrived at the cemetery in late afternoon, we found them dead inside the pit. At 5 o'clock in the evening, 6 trucks arrived at the synagogue. Mante entered accompanied by policemen and ordered us to get up and get into the vehicles. Everyone knew the end was near, and his days were over, and the unfortunates instinctively approached the walls of the synagogue and wrote their first names and their surnames, and that on this date they became martyrs. And if someone remained alive, he should avenge the blood that was shed. I approached the wall to write my own name there. Avram Gunik said to me, write my name also, because my legs are paralyzed and I cannot move. I told him, Izzy, your son-in-law, will write your name. Izzy said to me, I only write in Polish, and I want my name to be written on this wall in Hebrew letters and in Hebrew writing. I approached the wall and I wrote, on such and such day we shall become martyrs. If there remains a trace of the Jews of Kovel, remember us and avenge our blood that has been spilled. I must mention that Mante did not disturb us while we were writing, although when there was a pause in the writing, the Ukrainian policemen lost their impatience, and with the butts of their rifles began to pry us away from the walls. Enough, you bloody Jews, the trucks are waiting, they shouted. Avram Gunik, may his blood be avenged, could not stand on his feet. I took his right hand, and his son-in-law took his left, and we let him out of the synagogue. He begged us while weeping bitterly to put him on the first truck, for he wanted to die quickly. He and his son-in-law got into the third truck. I boarded the last one. Each vehicle was accompanied by 16 armed policemen. The truck headed in the direction of Trisk Street, named by the Jews, called Trisk Street for the Trisker Hasidim. As they passed over the river, the victims threw their jewelry out into the water. Along the way, I saw people jumping out of the trucks. The policemen allowed them to jump, but as each victim left the vehicle, he was immediately shot in the head. The vehicle stopped near the cemetery, which was surrounded by many policemen. The victims entered and gathered near the purification room. They were told to undress and throw the clothing into the purification room. Everyone undressed together, men, women, even children, and 6-month-old babies. When the people from the first vehicle had undressed, they were led to the pit. Entire families went together to the slaughter, even brides with their grooms. The children clutched their parents. A 10-year-old boy wrapped tightly around his father's thigh. The small children and babies were held in their mother's arms. The extermination was carried out thus. 2 boards were stretched over the pit. They told the unfortunates to stand on them facing the pit. 3 murderers stood behind them, dressed in white and with their faces masked, their hands covered in white mittens and holding automatic weapons. They aimed the muzzle at the brain of the victim so that the bullet wouldn't miss its target, although the kill shot hit the heart, the earlobe, and other places. When the parents fell into the pit, their children were pulled in after them. Most of them died of suffocation. While they eliminated the people from the first vehicle, those from the second vehicle were ordered to undress and approach the pit, where they were eliminated. And thus the horror was repeated over and over until the end of the last victim. Not a single word came from the mouths of the victims. Their hearts were fossilized. They did not weep, they did not sob. Husband did not speak to wife, and groom did not speak to the bride who stood to his right. I approached the pit, which was filled to the rim with the dead. As I stood on the plank, I saw Yisrael Ishner, who had been shot in the heart, and he was twisting over the pile of the dead the entire length of the pit. This atrocious sight made my head spin, and I fainted and fell into the pit. The last of the victims were killed, and the pit was not covered with dirt, but had passed the edge. I lay there unconscious until 11:30 that night. Suddenly I realized that I was alive, but the dead was still warm and it flowed from my hands. I wiped the blood from one hand. I believed I had been wounded, but lo and behold, my hand was uninjured. I tried to free my head, but in vain. There lay upon me a woman whose hair was tangled with mine. During the night, the wind blew, clotting the blood that had been spilled, a kind of stew on a thick night. And it was difficult for me to separate my head from hers. I started to rip out her hair. After a great deal of labor, I succeeded in freeing my head. I propped my hand on the dead with inhuman force. I freed the rest of my body, climbed up. From my body flowed streams of the blood of our dear dead. I stood next to the pit and saw it rising and falling, rising and falling. The moans of the suffocating people were horrible. 6 hours after the Aktia, and the victims were still fighting with the Malchamavas. The first question that tormented me was, what now? Where shall I go? I was naked as the day I was born, with only underwear covering my skin. The cold overcame me. Goosebumps gripped me at the sound of the groans of the suffocating. I left the cemetery, desolate and completely covered in blood, alone in the dark of the night. Behind me, the groans of my brothers and sisters, the great Jewish community of Kovel, and before me, the fear of the darkness, the fear of extinction, the fear of loneliness, and the fear of great devastation. As I stood by the gates of the cemetery, an inkling of an idea came to me. I knew a farmer named Hodder from the Karsin village who had bought a small house not far from the cemetery. Hodder had a white horse. He worked for me, bringing the calves to the train station, and he made good money. I said in my heart, I'll approach Hodder. Maybe he'll save me, because I had saved him by giving him an advance on his salary so he could buy things he especially needed. Hodder had a large dog, scary and threatening. Although since the dog knew me, I thought to myself, maybe he won't attack me. I approached the gate. The dog began to bark